Chapter 52 All in. I hadn't thought that even you could become an inner sect disciple. Luo Li's face was expressionless, his voice cold. Zuemo looked inside the valley, and he was slightly relieved. Luo Li had only tore down the Jinji at the mouth, but didn't go in. He clearly came prepared. Luo Li might be doted upon by all the elders, but he didn't dare to act too brashly. If the ling grasses and herbs inside the valley were damaged, the elders in the sect wouldn't let him off. Machinations in the shadows. Zuemo was clear the other didn't dare use them on him. The kind of identity that a ling plant farmer had, it meant that he would receive the sect's protection. What the other could use was an open and public attack. Looking at the mess and the completely ruined Jinji, even though Zuemo knew the other was just venting, but his anger still rose. The other had definitely come, because of Hao Min Shiji. Zuemo wasn't scared. He had reason on his side. Even if it got brought up to the sect leader, no one would say that he was wrong. Zuemo controlled the anger, his voice mocking. Xixiang's sword is so sharp. A pity to waste these flowers and grasses. Luo Li looked coldly at Zuemo, his eyes filled with disdain and contempt. Whether my sword is sharp or not, you will know. You dare to touch my woman. Oh, Zuemo brushed it off. He looked at his right hand and said unconcernedly, so what if I touched her? If there hadn't been the previous incident with Hao Min, these two were people that he would have tried to curry favor with. But since it had proceeded to this step, both sides like water and fire, there was no possibility of peace. Zuemo's stubbornness came out. Rather than be bullied, he would rather rebel. Even if it might end terribly for him, he wouldn't let the other off easily. If he didn't have some viciousness, with his origins as an outer sect disciple, he would be greatly bullied in the future. Luo Li's pupils shrunk, the indifferent expression on his face finally changing. 3 months, the assessment of the sect. I'll wait for you. You said wait, so you'll wait? Zuemo smiled coldly and gasped. Xixiang's face is so big. Luo Li's expression twisted. His eyes sprouted fire as he looked at Zuemo. He barely managed to control himself and snorted angrily. Let's see if your mouth is still that hard then. Finishing, he flew off. Who does he think he is? Zuemo snorted coldly. He turned to walk inside the valley. Everything in the valley was undisturbed. Luo Li basically didn't come in. Luo Li might be arrogant, but he wasn't dumb. He controlled his behavior, ruining the Jinji of West Wind Valley, but not touching the ling grasses in the valley. The elders of the sect would let it go. They forbid fighting in the sect. Every sect would have this kind of rules. But fighting inside the sect would always happen. There were many reasons, but one of the most important ones was undoubtedly the implicit permission of the elders in the sect. What a sect was afraid of was not having a competitive environment. The occasional skirmish was more beneficial than harmful in the eyes of elders. In most cases, they held a permissive attitude, but Zuemo felt that these things didn't have too much to do with him. He didn't believe that Luo Li would dare come into West Wind Valley. His West Wind Valley was one of the important areas of the sect, possibly even more important than Cold Mist Valley. Just like normal, he continued to make Dan, right up until Li Yingfeng Shiji came. What? Zuemo cried out. What kind of rule is that? Li Yingfeng explained. It's really like this. Supposedly, because the sect forbid the disciples from fighting, so they made the sect assessment the place for resolving conflicts. He can challenge you at that time, and you must take it up. If you don't, you have to give the other 50 contribution points. But I am a ling plant farmer. A ling plant farmer. Do you want me to grab a flying sword and start fighting with him? Zuemo was indignant. You can ask someone. Li Yingfeng was also helpless. That doesn't break the rules. Production cultivators like you can use the Dan you make, or what you've planted to hire others. But you can only ask the other Xixiang in the sect, not anyone from other sections. The other Xixiang in the sect. Weixing Xixiang hasn't come out. Who else can I invite? Zuemo felt that he was going crazy. The only person in the sect that could win over Luo Li was Weixing Xixiang. But Weixing Xixiang was in the sword cave, and won't be coming out soon. The rules are like this. Li Yingfeng suggested. You could go buy some powerful talismans. Zuemo felt that he was going to faint. Buy talismans? He was so poor he only had the dregs. Buying talismans? Only now did Zhuemo understand what Luo Li had meant in his last word that day. His mood instantly became terrible. Damn it! It was going to be big trouble. Facing Luo Li outside the valley, he wasn't afraid because he had been confident that Luo Li didn't dare to do anything to him. When he knew that the inner sect had this rule, he instantly blanked. Things like sword energy, it was fine to use to frighten people. Facing Luo Li who practiced empty sword, someone who didn't even have a sword scripture, wouldn't even know how he died. The elders in the sect, of course, wouldn't let Luo Li really injure him. But humiliation wouldn't be avoided. 50 contribution points. That was a very large amount of wealth. If he sold himself, he wouldn't get 50 contribution points. Thinking about it, Zhuemo became even more depressed. Liang Feng looked in sympathy at Zhuemo. She wanted to help but had no way. She could only take the great strength pills that Zhuemo had prepared and left. The news that Luo Li had sent out a challenge to Zhuemo was instantly spread to everyone in the sect. These days when Haomin saw Zhuemo, she instantly became high and mighty. Zhuemo wanted to slap her again. The gazes of everyone else when they saw Zhuemo was extremely strange. Of course, there wasn't a lack of others who were laughing at Zhuemo. No one thought that Zhuemo was going to have a good outcome. I heard that your Luo Li Shixiang sent a challenge to you? Shifeng Rong calmly asked Zhuemo. Even Master knew. Zhuemo could only reply, yes. The matter between you and your Haomin Shiji, I won't interfere. Shifeng Rong said coldly. But the assessment in the sect, I don't care what method you use, but you will not lose. If you lose, The implication in the last sound made Zhuemo's already withered heart dry up like a flower petal and scatter to the ground. This disciple is only a ling plant farmer. Zhuemo couldn't help reminding Master. So what if you are a ling plant farmer? Shifeng Rong's voice went up, her eyes resolute. My disciple cannot lose. But I don't care what method you use. Shifeng Rong impatiently interrupted Zhuemo's. Zhuemo's heart turned, and he said, Master is so confident in this disciple. This disciple naturally doesn't want to fail. This disciple has nothing to request except to pick a sword scripture from the records room. Since Master wanted him not to lose, then it would be dumb if he didn't ask for a bit of help. He thought of the Li Water sword scripture in the records room. It's too late for you to start practicing the sword now. Shifeng Rong furrowed her brow. This disciple only has this one request. Zhuemo saw that it might be possible, and his heart lightened as he hurried responded. If that's the case, I can agree. She looked at Zhuemo, and her voice was stern as she said, But if you lose, I won't let you off lightly. Yes, Zhuemo resolutely promised. Take this tile. You can pick a sword scripture from the records room. Shifeng Rong's expression was icy as she stated, 3 months. Right now, Zhuemo was only grateful the sect assessment was 3 months in the future. He still had a hint of life. With the quickest possible speed, he picked Li Water sword scripture and ran for the Little West Wind Yard. He was clear what Luo Li was planning on. The whole sect, everyone felt that he didn't have a chance of winning. But Zhuemo didn't want to admit defeat like this. Whenever he thought of Luo Li and Haomin's faces, the anger in his chest rose. And this would directly decide his future status in the sect. To say of nothing else, Master's warning was in his ears. Wasn't it just a sword scripture? What was simpler than sword scripture? After getting sliced a few thousand times, would he get it? Zhuemo thought hatefully. There was no possibility of winning if he relied on normal methods. His gamble was all on Puyao. But gambling on Puyao meant countless jingshi. You want help? All right, as long as you can pay the jingshi. Anything can be discussed. Puyao said interestedly. If the price you pay is high enough, I can go sort Luo Li out immediately. Guarantee no one would find out. As expected. As Zhuemo expected, Puyao started his extortion. What? It's higher than the previous price? Of course, this is called reacting to the market. The smile on Puyao's face was enchanting. You have to consider it well. The price tomorrow would be even higher. Zhuemo went to find Li Yingfeng. Shiji, how much jingshi can you lend me? Zhuemo's eyes were red, his throat rough. Li Yingfeng didn't hesitate. I can lend it all, 3/3 grade. Many thanks, Shiji. Zhuemo didn't waste words. There was only gratefulness in his heart. It was only at the crucial time that it could be seen if a person was worthy. Old Black and Guilu also unhesitatingly gave all the jingsher they had to Zuemo. Even Su Qing secretly gave Zuemo 50 pieces of second-grade jingsher. The whole sect knew that Zuemo was borrowing jingsher. Many people were looking at it as a joke. Did he ask you yet? I don't dare to lend to him. Exactly. Just became an inner sect disciple and dared to offend Haomin Shiji. He really thinks he's someone. Oh, I remember that Xiao Emo was a pretty steady person. Why would he do something so dumb? When a little person enjoys success, they become arrogant. Zuemo sold all of the mature ling herbs and grasses in his ling fields and received 1 piece of third-grade jingsher. Roughly calculating, Zuemo had about 6 pieces of third-grade jingsher on his hands. This was a huge sum, a sum that Zuemo had never even thought about. Not long ago, his yearly income was 20 or so second-grade jingsher. The 6 pieces of third-grade jingsher gave off an enticing shine and a strong ling energy vibration. This is everything I gathered, give it all to you. Zuemo threw the 6 pieces of third-grade jingsher to Pu Yao. Pu Yao grinned as he took the jingsher. He played with one with his right hand, gently throwing it up and then gently catching it. His expression was intoxicated as he said, "Such a moving sound. Jingsher is really the most reliable thing in this world. Teach me this." Zuemo took out the jade stick for Li Water Sword scripture, his voice resolute. His expression was slightly tired. The zombie face slightly gray, but the pair of eyes were like 2 balls of jumping flames, hot and vicious. All in. Chapter 53 Great Strength Pill Dong Fu. Master Yen, if there is snow foxtail grass next time, don't forget to notify me. An old person dressed grandly kept on adding. Yen Li's round face was full of smiles. Of course. Master Wang, don't worry. I'll certainly leave it for you. That's good. Master Wang nodded in satisfaction and then said enviously, your sect really has many great talents. You even have a ling plant farmer now. In the future, you'll have more support. Yen Lu was smug inside but didn't show it. He repeatedly shook his hands. Master Wang exaggerates, our sect still needs your guidance. The two exchanged a few more courtesies before Yen Lu saw Master Wang out the door. Ling plant farmers are really ling plant farmers. Returning to the store, Yen Lu sighed in satisfaction. He was extremely grateful that he had coincidentally encountered Zuemo that day. Otherwise, he might have been snatched away by another sect. If this kept on going, then the sect will have an additional source of wealth. More importantly, the sect's influence in Dongfu will increase dramatically. In the future, Wukong Sword Sect would have an astonishing genius like Wei Sheng, a ling plant farmer like Zuemo, and someone skilled at business like Li Yingfeng. The sect would pass on very well into their hands. Li Yingfeng took in everything. Taking advantage of Master's good mood, she opened her mouth to help Zuemo. Yes, Master, look. Our business is much better than before. Zuemo Shixiang was a large part. Yen Lu was clever and understood what his disciple was saying. He chuckled. You don't have to say things for your Zhuo Shixiang. I know you two have a good relationship. He said unconcernedly. Young people, dampening the spirit, it isn't a bad thing. Your Zhuo Shixiang looks easy to speak to, but in his bones, he is a very stubborn person. And he had to end up with an extremely competitive master. Haha, it's so funny. Yen Lu thought of something and roared with laughter. Li Yingfeng said furiously. But Shixiang is a ling plant farmer. The sect assessment only tests the sword. Why not, little art of cloud and rain? Isn't this to bully people? Haha, disciple, don't be angry. Our sect is a sword sect. If we don't test the sword, what do we test? Don't worry, we're going to be there. Naturally, we wouldn't let him be humiliated too much. But if he isn't as good as others, it's hard to avoid suffering a bit. Yen Li's expression became stern. Us sword cultivators, what we pursue is our hearts like a sword. What is a sword? That is win or lose, that's life or death. That's death if one does not advance. You have to remember, what sword cultivator's walk is going against the heavens. He is a ling plant farmer, but since he is in a sword sect, he needs to understand this. Li Yingfeng was entranced by the words and became speechless, standing still at her spot. Seeing this, Yenlu smiled and didn't disturb her, heading inside the hall. Suddenly, someone pushed open the door to enter. "The great strength pill I wanted, is there any?" the person asked straight away. Liang Feng instantly shook and her thoughts returned. She hurriedly responded, "Yes, yes." The other gave a joyful expression asking, "How many?" 20. "Great. I'll take all of them." The other instantly said. Liang Feng reacted very quickly. She cleverly shook her head. "I can only sell 15 to you." The other asked dissatisfied, "Why can't you sell all of it to me?" Liang Feng's expression was calm as she lied. "Someone reserved 5. All right." The other was helpless. He had only ordered 10 in the beginning. "Then sell 15 to me." He crisply paid the jingsher, took the great strength pill and rushed away. Liang Feng looked at the remaining 5 great strength pills, her mind turning furiously. This person had put so much importance on this great strength pill. This great strength pill definitely had something that wasn't normal. If she could find what was unique, then the way to sell this great strength pill would open. Otherwise, she could only sell to this one person. She decided to send the great strength pill to the medical institute to have an expert examination. Even though it needed a significant payment, she could finally figure out the use of this great strength pill that Shitty had made. Wu Ming held the great strength pill he had just brought, his heart joyful. He didn't know who made the name, but it really wasn't pleasing. Such a good Dan, but such a country bumpkin name. It really ruined the Dan. He was smug inside. It was lucky that he was sensitive to fire-oriented Ling energy. Otherwise last time, he would have brushed right past this Dan. Last time, he had accidentally found that this Dan that was being sold had a faint flavor of fire. He had been born sensitive to the fire element. The fire element in this Dan might be faint, but it was extremely pure, so he had unhesitatingly brought it. After using it, to his joy and surprise, he found that fire energy in the Dan was actually sun essence. Fire, one of the 5 elements. In Sky Moon Jia, those that cultivated fire far surpassed the number of those that cultivated the 4 other elements added together. No matter if it was forging, or Dan making, or food refining, it couldn't leave fire. The most common scene was Li fire. It was also the most normal kind of fire. And what was chased after were all kinds of strange fire sources. Producing using high-grade fire sources meant that the process was half done, and what was created was even more pure. Originating from the sun Golden Crow fire, it was a fire source of 4th grade. Of course, Golden Crow fire came from the sun, but how to assimilate it, how to nurture it, only a rare few of the biggest sects knew of the method. And it was always passed on secretly. Even more, the 4th grade Golden Crow fire was fiery and hard to control. It was easy to harm the body, so the people that could use Golden Crow fire were very rare. So that was why Wu Ming was so happy when he found that strand of essence of the sun in this great strength pill. What made him even more exhilarated was that this essence of the sun was extremely young, but warm and harmless. Nurturing it inside the body, he actually didn't feel any ill effects. Like a treasure, he grew this strand of sun essence in his body, even though it was an extremely thin strand and very far from becoming Golden Crow fire. But if he could buy more great strength pills, and as the sun essence accumulated, there would be hope of the Golden Crow fire. Even if it would not form Golden Crow fire, this extremely pure and young sun essence could increase the grade of other fire sources if it was merged. Golden Crow fire wasn't something that could be bought with jingsher. His mood was very good after buying 15 great strength pills. After absorbing all 15, the sun essence in his body would dramatically increase. It was still very far from forming Golden Crow energy, but it was a start. Right now, he was hoping that no one else had found the benefit of this great strength pill. However, he knew his thoughts were slightly unrealistic. Other people weren't dumb. Great strength pill should be a new kind of Dan that just came out. As a result, he got a bargain. But he guessed that other people would quickly ascertain its effects. If he wanted to buy it in the future, it wouldn't be at this price. That strand of sun essence, it was worth far more than its present price. But he was already walking in front of everyone else. Adding on that his financial situation was well off, he wasn't afraid. Zhuemo felt his sea of consciousness was slightly unfamiliar. He hadn't come for a certain period of time, and the changes inside were pretty big. The area of the consciousness of much larger than before. The alluring deep red fire was like a furiously growing weed, now a section taller. The star in the void seemed even further away, but it was even more brighter. The temperature of the ice river was even lower. The icicles inside were even finer. The movement of the tides more powerful than before. Well, at least you weren't dumb to the end, and picked a sword scripture suited to you. Puyao said lazily. Zhuemo listened extremely attentively. Honestly speaking, your talents at cultivating the sword really aren't anything. If it was your Shixiang, if he had been sliced 10 times by sword essence, he probably would have comprehended it. 20 times he could reach where you are now. You were sliced thousands of times to reach this progress, he. Puyao wasn't courteous. Zhuemo wasn't moved. However, your talents with the 5 elements are not bad. Puyao's voice suddenly became distant and deep. In this word, there is only appropriate or not, never the strongest. This Li Water Sword scripture can't be considered anything good, but it is appropriate for you. Puyao gave a rare compliment. Zhuemo opened his ears, fearful of losing a word. Every word that Puyao said was automatically converted by him into Jingshi. Li in the 8 trigrams, it belongs to fire, creating the saying Li fire. Anything in the world is sorted into yin and yang. Yang is fire, yin is water. Li water, the person who made this sword scripture is an interesting one. It was probably because he had received enough Jingshi that Puyao showed patience he never had before. This sword scripture, it still goes along the road of water. However, manipulate water as fire. Puyao evaluated. The idea isn't bad, but it's pretty unprofessional. No wonder it's only 3rd grade. Then Puyao raised his head and glanced at Zhuemo, adding, but for you to learn, it's more than enough. Very quickly, Zhuemo felt that the 6 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi were worth it. This profound and cryptic sword scripture, under Puyao's explanations, became clear and easy to understand. 2 hours later, Puyao started his conclusions. Alright, this is about it. All that's needed to be said has been said. If you still can't learn it, then it's you who's too dumb. This is the end. Zhuemo, who was entranced, asked unconsciously. Finished. Didn't you say that it had many flaws? Zhuemo persistently asked. Puyao gave his enchanting smile. The service of changing the sword scripture, you need to pay otherwise. Looking on the fact that we are familiar, I'll give you a discount. Only 100 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi. I'll change it to 4th grade. 5th grade, 1,000 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi. 100 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi. Zhuemo unhesitatingly turned and left the sea of consciousness. Behind him, Puyao laughed cheerfully. Leaving the sea of consciousness, Zhuemo found an empty space in the mountain valley. He took care to pick a place far from the Ling fields. Puyao had clearly stated the rationale. In conclusion, it was one sentence: manipulate water like fire. Basically, it was using the methods for manipulating fire to control water. Zhuemo increasingly found that this sword scripture was suited for him. His only flying sword was the 3rd grade ice crystal sword. Ice, the basic attribute, was water. The sword essence he comprehended. It was the tidal sword essence of Xianyan Shirshu. That was also related to water. And the core of this Li water sword scripture was also water. Was it even the heavens found Luo Li an eyesore? Zhuemo snickered darkly. He quickly took himself out of his thoughts. Chapter 54 Fire, 1 grade Lingdan. Contains a small amount of essence of the sun. Affects warm. Suited for long-term consumption. A certain possibility of forming golden crow fire. Those who consume it can become excited in the short term, and can be used for emergencies. When Li Yingfeng received this appraisal, she was shocked. There wasn't much about the other effects, but she was shocked still by a certain possibility of forming golden crow fire. After the appraisal, there was also an order form. The Medicine Institute was hoping to buy 100 pills, price able to be discussed. The Medicine Institute also suggested changing the same to Golden Crow Pill. Clearly, everyone hated the bumpkin name, that was Great Strength Pill. Immediately, Li Yingfeng gave the appraisal to her master. Seeing the 3 words Golden Crow Fire, Yanlu was shocked still. He took the appraisal, throwing down a "I'm going out," before flying into the sky, heading straight for Wukong Mountain. In Wukong Hall, all 4 elders of the Wukong sword sect were present. Pei Yan looked at the appraisal on his hand and had a serious expression. He said in a deep voice, "Golden Crow Fire, this is a 4th grade fire seed." Xianyan nodded. "Exactly, my green mulberry fire, Shimmy's violet flora fire. They are all 4th grade. I had heard of this Golden Crow Fire before. It comes from the sun, extremely young, extremely strong. It cannot be merged. In the 4th grade, it is a rare fine fire source." Pei Yuan smiled at Shifeng Rong. "Shimmy is really great. Zuemo had just studied with you and could make such a good thing as this." Shifeng Rong had a cold face. "This has nothing to do with me." Pei Yuan smiled, not minding. He lowered his head to think. The other people were also silent. Golden Crow Fire, 4th grade fire source. This caused this little Dan's price to fly into the sky. Xixiang, Yanle couldn't resist stating. If it can form Golden Crow Fire, then its use for the sect would be gigantic. Doesn't Sui still lack a good fire seed? And Zuemo himself, if he's learning Dan making, how can he not have a fire seed? What he was implying was that he wasn't very willing to sell it. Pei Yuan raised his head, responding, "I understand what you mean. That child Sui, I like him as well. And the forging branch of this sect would likely be passed on through him. He really does need Golden Crow Fire. But we still have to sell some. Right now the outside probably has heard the news about this Dan. If we don't sell any, it would enrage the public. That would only harm the sect without any benefit." Then Xixiang means, Yanlu was hesitant. "Just sell a small portion. We'll use the majority ourselves." Pei Yuan gave a slight smile. "We'll give the market price to Zuemo, not 1 piece less." Market price? Yes. Paper cannot hide fire. There are only just that many people in our Wukong sword sect that can make Dan. There's no need to cause Zuemo to hate us in secret because of a few pieces of Jingshi. Zuemo's past is unclear. There may be trouble in the future. Shifeng Rong, who had kept her cold face, suddenly opened. Wukong Hall became silent. Zuemo's identity and origins was a question that everyone had been having a headache about. Before, Zuemo had only been an outer sect disciple. His origin hadn't been a big problem. But right now, he wasn't just an inner sect disciple. Based on the direction, he would certainly become one of the core members of the next generation of Wukong sword sect. His identity and origins became a problem that Pei Yuan and the others had to face. His origins might not be a problem, Yanle said unconfidently. Pei Yuan waved his hand. "Since we don't know anything, then don't think too much about it. Regardless, just the fact that he is a Ling plant farmer, that's enough that we cannot give him up. Even more, there's now this Ling Dan that could make Golden Crow Fire." Hearing this, everyone didn't speak anymore. They all knew that sect leader Xixiang was right. If they suddenly expelled Zuemo right now out of the sect, it would be what countless people wanted. Xianyan suddenly asked, "Can Shimmy make this kind of Dan?" "I don't know Art of Crimson Flame." Shifeng Rong said coolly. "This Dan needs to use Art of Crimson Flame. Manipulate water like fire." It was easy to say, but for a Ling plant farmer, it was very difficult, especially when it was in a sword scripture. There were in total 7 moves in Li Water Sword scripture. Manipulate water like fire was the core, but it was too far right now for Zuemo. What he needed to do was familiarize himself with the sword moves. Each move would always have a few dozens of transformations, and each transformation needed to be controlled by Ling energy. Even more, the entire process had to be completed in a thought. Based on the complexity of Ling energy manipulation, these sword moves weren't as complex as Little Art of Cloud and Rain, but they needed to be finished in a very short amount of time, so the difficulty actually increased. When making the move, the attention needed to be focused. That was even truer during battle. The other usually wouldn't give you the chance to think. You needed to instinctively finish the complete move. This was also why sword cultivators liked pure things. The purer something was, the less the disturbance it had. Zuemo finally could use that ice crystal sword. It was certainly a painful thing to look at a good item, yet be unable to use it. The ice crystal sword turned into a flashing white light as it flew around Zuemo, coldness seeping out. It was silent, yet it gave the feeling of being able to explode. Lee Water Sword Scripture wasn't a sword scripture that used sword moves to win. It only had 7 sword moves, and they were relatively simple. As he practiced, Zuemo increasingly felt that the person who created this sword scripture probably was a Ling plant farmer. Many of the ways that the Ling energy moved in the scripture was similar to the 5-element spells of a Ling plant farmer. Receiving the benefit of that, Zuemo quickly familiarized himself with the sword moves. But familiarity was familiarity, so when he moved, there was still a feeling of rawness. Even Zuemo could see that his sword moves only had the appearance, but not the substance of the move. But he had no solution for that. He might have comprehended a bit of sword essence, but he didn't know at all how to merge sword essence with sword moves. Right now, he was just swallowing it all and hoping to digest some. The manipulation of water like fire that Pu Yao had said, Zuemo couldn't make heads or tails of it. According to Pu Yao, the power of this Lee Water Sword scripture wasn't strong originally. If he couldn't manipulate water like fire, this sword scripture didn't have any value. Manipulate water like fire? Damn it, how could he manipulate water like fire? His fundamentals were really too weak despite that he had touched the door to sword essence. Wei Sheng was obsessed with the sword. The number of sword scriptures and research that he had encountered couldn't be counted. Even though it wasn't anything high quality, but he had already killed, and with his wealthy battle experience, his fundamentals were extremely deep and no average sect disciple could compare. And inner sect disciples like Luo Li, they were taught from little by their master. They could read everything in the records. In comparison, their fundamentals were much thicker than Zuemo. He barely managed to get a master, but she only taught him dan-making. When he had been Lianqi, he had only roughly studied those basic sword scriptures that Wei Sheng had given him. He truly had a weak base. Pu Yao had lectured for 2 hours, but it was all theoretical guidance, none of it practical. But the time Zuemo had was only 3 months. How could he not be panicked? Inside, he cursed the adulterous couple of Luo Li and Hao Ming countless times. Zuemo tried to remain calm. He had practiced little art of cloud and rain to the 4th level, but had never found anything that connected it to fire. Don't panic, don't panic. Closing his eyes, Zuemo recited to himself over and over. When he opened his eyes again, his gaze had recovered its clarity, but deeply hidden was a touch of stubbornness. Pu Yao said, "Wasn't it just sword essence? Sliced a few thousand times, naturally you will learn." Zuemo said to himself, "Wasn't it just a sword scripture? Go will slice it 10,000 times. If it fails, then a few dozen more. Don't believe it won't work. If it doesn't, then slice 1,000,000 times. Slice until it works." Having decided, Zuemo wasn't panicked anymore and raised up his sword. "I slice." Little West Wind Yard. The sword energy flew, coldness spread. A storefront on the west street of Dongfu. Many people had already gathered. These people gathered together and chattered and argued. "Why hasn't it opened yet? I've already waited an entire night." Someone grouched. "What's a night? I've been guarding for 2 days and nights." A person on the side followed up. "Is this store going to open? Are they playing with us? What can we do? It's their Dan. If they want to sell, they sell. If they don't, you don't have a choice." "That's true. Do you really think that Golden Crow pill can really form Golden Crow fire?" Someone couldn't resist asking. 4th grade Golden Crow fire. Does anyone in Dongfu have it? Haven't heard that anyone had it. But it was an appraisal from the Medicine Institute, so it shouldn't be far off. Nothing else. Essence of the sun. It would be beneficial if it's added to a fire source. The person who spoke was brawny and tall with a square face and large ears. He sighed. "The kind of thing that is fire seed, especially good fire source, is it something people like us can buy?" "Bro, what do you do?" "Me," the square-faced man said. "I make food." At this time, an old man suddenly greeted him. "Hey, Master Xiao, you came too." The crowd suddenly stirred. The person who had been speaking with the square-faced man instantly had a very interesting expression. No one would have thought that this large and brawny man was actually the best Ling food chef in Dongfu. The food pavilion of Master Xiao. It was the most famous Ling food restaurant in Dongfu. He was especially skilled at making marvelous combinations of all kinds of Ling food. The Ling food he made, it didn't only increase cultivation, but the flavor was incomparable. Just Ling grains, he could make over 36 dishes. The square-faced man raised his hands. Shopkeeper Wang, are you also here for the Golden Crow pill? The crowd stirred again. Some people had already guessed the old man's origins. Master Xiao's food pavilion Wang So Wine. The food pavilion sold all kinds of Ling food. And old man Wang was skilled at fermenting all kinds of Ling wine. Exactly. The person was a thin old man, his spine slightly bent, but his beady eyes were extremely bright. His expression was slightly helpless. I'm here for my precious granddaughter. Master Xiao chucked. What's the little girl learning? Forging. Old man Wang was clearly unsatisfied with his granddaughter choosing to learn forging. He couldn't help complaining. My son learnt dan making, my granddaughter learns forging. My handicraft, it seems I'm taking it into the ground. Don't panic, don't panic. If you ask for disciples, there would be countless people trying to get in. Master Xiao hurriedly comforted. Oh, evidently having thought of something, old man Wang sighed. He looked at the surroundings. Seeing that more and more people were coming, his brow furrowed. This Wukong sword sect looks like it's going to rise. And Master Xiao agreed. But they do have the ability. Yes. At this time, the tightly closed store door suddenly opened. Chapter 55. Going to get rich? Liang Feng was slightly drowsy as she opened the store door. After Master had rushed back to Wukong Mountain a few days ago, he still hadn't returned. These 2 days, because Master wasn't here, she had kept the store closed. In any case, the recent inventory had pretty much all been sold. The next batch of Ling Dan from 4th Shirgu still hadn't left the cauldron, and there wasn't much else to sell in the store. Wukong Sword Sect was only a small sect, and didn't have much produce. In Dongfu, they only had this small store. Most of what they sold were the Lingdan that 4th Shirgu made, and the talismans that 2nd Shirshu forged. If nothing was happening, she would sleep. After entering Zhuji, there wasn't much need for sleep. However, for women, sleep wasn't just a requirement, it was a form of relaxation. On this point, Liang Feng wasn't an exception. She frequently slept until her eyes rolled, and became muddle-headed. It was completely different from her usual cleverness and generosity. Muddle-headed. Liang Feng seemed to see that there were many people outside the door. She suddenly became alert, her drowsiness completely vanished. Looking at the dense field of people, her entire body became numb. So many people. What had happened? It's open. Finally open. Hey boss, I want to buy. Pushing open the store door was like the spark that lit the fire. The originally quiet situation suddenly became noisy and messy. Looking at the sea of heads outside, Liang Feng was like a statue, pinned to the door entrance. In the West Wind Valley, Zuemo felt that his entire body was numb. Not one place wasn't sore. Barely controlling the Ling energy in his body, the ice crystal sword was wobbling in mid-air. His eyes glared furiously as he tried to control the last remaining bit of Ling energy in his body. Go! The voice was rough and dissonant. The wobbling ice crystal sword turned to a flash of white light, leaving behind a faint cold mist in the air. Pa! The white light hit the wooden target 10 feet away. There was a figure drawn on the target. It was the person whose Zuemo cursed countless times every day, Luoli. The wooden target instantly shattered. Each fragment was coated with a thin layer of ice. Fighting with G. Kill you. Opening his eyes, Zuemo couldn't resist groaning. So painful. As he was struggling up, when he saw where he was, he finally remembered that he had fainted when practicing Li Water Sword scripture. As his Ling energy ran out. First seeing that he was covered in mud, then thinking about how in his dream, he had demolished the wooden target that had Luoli drawn on it. He couldn't help laughing. That was really absurd. 1006. That was the number of attacks he remembered before fainting. The Ling energy in his body was at a dangerously low level. Before fainting, he had used up the Ling energy too much. He decided to go to the rock room to recover his Ling energy. The soreness over his body meant that each step was extremely painful. Like a turtle, he moved slowly towards the opening, his mouth giving groans along the way. Shitty shitty. Zuemo suddenly heard someone yelling from outside the valley. It was somewhat familiar. He stopped walking. He was secretly grateful that he hadn't entered the stone room. He saw Su Yixixiang fly in. When he saw Zuemo's sorry state, he first blanked and then smiled. How did Shitty get like this? Zuemo grimaced. I wasn't careful when practicing the sword and tripped. Shitty really is hard-working. Sui praised, and then sighed. The matter between Shitty and Luo Li Shixiang. I can't really do anything. I heard that Shitty was lacking in Jingshi. I still have some, and can relieve Shitty's need. Finishing, he took out 2 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi. Zuemo blanked. He had a good impression of Su Yi, but didn't have a deep relationship. He had never thought that Su Yixixiang would stand on his side on this matter. The other coming of his own initiative to shove Jingshi at him. It was too strange. And Zuemo was even more surprised by Su Yixixiang's next move. He saw Su Yixixiang take out a silver bracelet and hand it to Zuemo. This is the Star Silver Vambrace. It is a defensive talisman I forged. 2nd grade, able to block 3 attacks from a Ningmai cultivator. Finishing his explanation, he shoved it into Zuemo's chest. Zuemo was confused, and he completely did not understand the situation. Right, does Shitty still have any more of the Great Strength Pill? Sui asked warmly. Great Strength Pill. He didn't know how Su Yixixiang knew about the Great Strength Pill. Looking at the 2 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi and the shining vambrace on his hands, Zuemo was almost knocked unconscious by the meat pie from the sky. He replied instinctively, nothing left. Then I want to order 100 from Shitty, each 150 pieces of 2nd grade Jingshi. How about it? Sui stared at Zuemo as he asked. 50 2nd grade Jingshi each one, 100. Was he dreaming? He still hasn't woken up? He looked dumbly at a place not far away. There wasn't the wooden target that Luo Li was drawn on. Wasn't dreaming. 100 pills. Each 150 pieces of 2nd grade Jingshi. He muttered to himself. Right, what does Shitty think? Sui was slightly nervous. Had the world gone crazy? Zuemo looked at Su Yixixiang staring at him and thought dumbly. Does Shitty have some problems? Sui saw that Zuemo hadn't reacted for a long time and couldn't resist asking. No problem. Zuemo's voice was slightly weak. For some reason, he didn't feel any joy. It might be that it felt too unrealistic. Amazing. I just knew that Shitty would definitely help, Sui grinned. He took out 5 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi and shoved it onto Zuemo's hand. These 5 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi can be the down payment. Shitty's body is the first priority, don't tire yourself. Shitty doesn't have to send all 100 pills at the same time. Oh, after the sect assessment, don't rush. Zuemo dumbly agreed. Seeing Su Yixixiang contentedly leave, he still held a dumb expression. He hadn't managed to absorb what just happened. Who could tell him what was going on? Maybe it was really a dream, Zuemo thought inside. Maybe in the next instant he would wake up, and the things on his hands would disappear in a blink. Is Shirji here? Yen Le Shirshu's voice sounded from outside the valley. Before Zuemo could reply, Yen Le Shirbo flew in. When Yen Le saw Zuemo's state, he first stilled and then smiled. Oh, Shitzi really is hard-working. It really seemed that there was great hope for this year's sect assessment. Shirbua. Zuemo didn't dare offend him. Even if his entire body was sore, he still bowed. Yen Le Shirbua saw the things in Zuemo's arms, and then thought of Su Yi who he encountered outside the valley. He couldn't help but curse inside. Su Yi might be collected and calm usually, but his feet were really quick. Just now, I encountered your Su Yixixiang. He should have already ordered Great Strength Pill from you. Yen Le said smilingly. Huh, how does Shirbua know? In the elders, Zuemo felt the most harmonious was Yen Le Shirbua. Haha, how many did he order? Yen Le asked in response. 100 pills. As expected, the same as second Shixiang. A single move was this vicious. Yen Le swore inside, but the smile on his face became even more harmonious. Shirbua has come this time for Great Strength Pill as well. Zuemo, whose thoughts had just returned, suddenly stilled. Does Shirji's Great Strength Pill contain Sun Essence? Yenlu stared at Zhuemo as he asked. Yes. Zhuemo woodenly nodded. Yenlu clapped his hands and praised. As expected. Zhuemo was frightened. With a head full of confusion, Zhuemo finally couldn't bear it and asked. Even now, this disciple doesn't understand. Shibua, what is going on? Hehe, Shirji, don't rush, I will tell you all. Only now did Yenlu tell the result of the appraisal of Great Strength Pill to Zhuemo Fire Source? Zhuemo had seen it before on the records. No matter if it was forging or dan making, as long as it was using the fire method, a fire source was something necessary. The more rare and precious high quality the fire source was, the greater its aid in the process. Especially for those experts in dan and forging, fire source was especially important. Zhuemo finally understood what Golden Crow fire exactly was. Zhuemo wasn't clear. But if it really was a fine one among the 4th grade fire source like Yenlu Shibua said, he instantly understood the value of the dan he made. Golden Crow fire was the object of the dreams of the dan and forging cultivators. Yenlu was secretly observing Zhuemo's eyes. It was a pity that Zhuemo had a zombie face, and nothing could be observed. The sect leader hopes that only we could receive the selling rights of the Great Strength Pill from Shirji. As to the price, don't worry Shirji, we will use the market price. Yenlu stared at Zhuemo as he slowly explained. Only selling rights? Zhuemo unhesitatingly nodded. That isn't a problem. For him, it was the same whoever he sold it to, but his roots were in the sect. If he gave the only selling rights to the sect naturally had to give him an equivalent repayment. The sect leader had always been fair. Zhuemo was very confident on this point. Yenlu was very satisfied with Zhuemo's answer. He thought inside, Zhuemo's identity and past might not be clear, but he was very loyal to the sect. His expression became even more harmonious. Good, don't worry, we won't treat you unfairly. Other than the market price, the contribution point for each Great Strength Pill will be double. If you are interested in cultivating the sword, in the future, the sect's shapeless sword scripture, empty sword scripture, and the other 4th grade sword scriptures can all be passed to you. Don't fail the hopes that the sect has in you. Right, the name Great Strength Pill is too unpleasant. In the future, it will be changed to Golden Crow Pill. Finishing, he took out a blue vest to hand to Zhuemo. This is a 2nd grade Immortal Waterling armor. It's a piece of Shibua's goodwill. If you wear it, it will add a bit more protection. Zhuemo hurried to thank him. Shirji needs to make some soon. Yenlu gave a troubled expression. Right now, your Shiji is being surrounded by people and can't get out. Only selling some dan can calm them down. He couldn't help but admire sect leader Shixiang's eyes. If they really didn't sell, it was likely that the sect's little store in Dongfu would have been torn down. Wukong Sword Sect would have become known to everyone. At that time, it was hard to say if they could still keep Zhuemo. Zhuemo was stunned. He hadn't thought that the matter would be like that. He instantly said, Don't worry Shibua, this disciple will immediately make a batch. To say nothing of anything else, if Li Yingfeng Shiji was in trouble he could not ignore it. Yenlu nodded contentedly, and after exhorting Zhuemo again, he finally left. Zhuemo finally reacted, his eyes large as he became excited, curiously examining the Immortal Waterling armor in his hand. This was the first time he had seen Ling armor. In curiosity, he added in Ling energy. The Immortal Waterling armor suddenly turned into a ball of blue water and climbed up his arm, quickly covering his body. He could clearly feel the connection between this Ling armor and him. Was he really going to get rich? He stared dumbly at the Immortal Waterling armor on his body. There were still hints of disbelief in his eyes. Chapter 56 Determination Great Strength Pill. No Golden Crow Pill. The change it caused to Zhuemo's circumstances was very evident, especially in resolving his financial situation. But no matter if it was Su Yixixiang or Yenlu Shibua, they all seemed to think Zhuemo didn't have a chance. This could be seen from the talismans they gave. One gave a vambrace, the other Ling armor. They was all defensive. Clearly, the two were only trying to make it a less ugly ordeal for Zhuemo. Right now the problem in front of Zhuemo was very serious. One was earning Jingshi, the other was practicing sword scripture. Presently he was in debt. Earning Jingshi was undoubtedly the most pressing. No matter what time, earning Jingshi was the greatest problem he had to face. And cultivating sword scripture, in a very large way, it would decide his outcome when he faced Luo Li's challenge in the sect assessment. This two matters all dragged in a question. Time. If he made Dan, then the time he had to practice sword scripture would drastically shorten. Originally, he didn't have much of a chance at winning. Calculating it that way, Zuemo felt his rate of winning was basically zero. In the end, did he want Jingshi or to fight for his honor? Zuemo became trapped in a dilemma. Yi, what have you been up to recently? The pink paper crane flew in, the same graceful writing. Practicing the sword. Oh, when did Yi become so vigorous? I'm not very used to it. Going up against a cold and perverted man. Hee, what happened? His woman flirted with me, got slapped. He came to get back. Zuemo gave it a bit of improvement. Oh, it could be considered flirtation, Zuemo thought. Chop him. A strong bandit aura came through the two graceful words. Zuemo, a man blushed with shame. But right now there's a really good chance to earn lots of Jingshi. Zuemo, for some strange reason, wrote down his dilemma. Gentlemen can be killed, but cannot be humiliated. Just measly Jingshi. Do not let me look down on Yi. Just measly Jingshi. As expected from those that didn't know hunger and thirst. Zuemo was reflecting. Why did he ask such an unreliable person? He disdainfully replied. Woman, what gentleman are you? His gaze uncontrollably stopped for a while on the gentleman can be killed, but cannot be humiliated. Hee. I only hope for Yi to display his masculinity. Ye's going to work. Don't reply. Zuemo returned the words, and threw the brush to one side. Zuemo spent one day working hard in the Dan room. He gave all the golden crow pills he made to Yen Le Sherbois, to free Li Yingfeng Shiji from her predicament. Before the sect assessment, Zuemo decided not to make any more. He decided to put all his time on practicing the sword. Whenever he thought about Luo Li and Hao Min's face, his entire body was filled with the urge to fight. Why did he earn Jingshi? Wasn't it to become strong? Wasn't it to become strong and be able to find the answer? After thinking it through, he didn't hesitate any longer. Hesitance, indecisiveness, it was all brushed away. Zuemo felt the world suddenly became light, his mind clear, unspeakably comfortable. Returning to West Wind Valley, he took up Ice Crystal Sword and started to practice Li Water Sword scripture over and over. He closed off the valley and he had hanged up a sign saying, "In seclusion, do not disturb." This quickly became a joke in Wukong Sword Sect. Zuemo had come out of the outer sect disciples. The incident with Hao Min made others feel he was too arrogant. Adding on the hot sales of Golden Crow Pill, there were many that were jealous. Many people were looking to see his joke. This was the difference. Luo Li's attitude was cold and arrogant, but people were only in awe and found it matter of fact. And Zuemo slapping Hao Min, even though it was first Hao Min's fault. But people didn't like seeing it. Just at this time, Qincheng Shixiang came back. Qincheng Shixiang was the student of the sect leader. His cultivation wasn't the highest, nor was his attack power. But he was born authoritative, deeply trusted by others, and had a high reputation. Luo Li and Qincheng sat facing each other. Qincheng had a square face and thick brows. His clothes were dusty, the exhaustion in his brows unable to be covered. But sitting there, he naturally gave off an aura of authority. Qincheng lectured. You were too brash. Taking Hao Min Shiji for this long, and not returning. No wonder sect leader was angry. Facing Qincheng, the iciness on Luo Li's face dissolved slightly. He was unconcerned. As long as she's happy. Facing his shitty, Qincheng was helpless. How his shimmy Hao Min's personality was he knew very well. He could only change the topic. Have you improved recently? Luo Li said proudly. 5th level. Qincheng gave a comforted expression. He took out a jade scroll. This is shapeless sword scripture. Take it and study it well. When Luo Li heard the words shapeless sword scripture, the light in his eyes brightened. Wei Sheng has entered the sword cave. The sect leader and others have high hopes for him, and must be hoping that he could recover. Void sword scripture. Qincheng glanced at Luo Li. He once was your sword servant, you cannot lose to him. Luo Li's expression was abnormally ugly, his fists clenching. unfeeling of the nails biting into his flesh. This matter, it had been a thorn in his heart. That pathetic person that he had ordered around before. The attentions paid to him now in the sect far surpassed himself. Whenever he thought about it, it was like there were worms chewing on his heart. In the past, void sword was split into shapeless sword scripture and empty sword scripture. If the sword scripture could be split, it can be merged again. Wei Xing might have outstanding your talent, but I've always been confident in Shidi's talents. Qin Qing said slowly. I hope that this can recover the glory of the founder on Shidi's hands. Luo Li's breathing became rushed. He stared at the jade scroll on his hand, his expression changing. Void sword scripture. This name that he had dreamed countless times about. The highest skill that the founder of the sect had created. In the countless techniques of the world, it ranked 6th grade, immensely powerful. Recover the founder's glory. Shi Xiang's words were like thunder from the heavens, echoing by his ears. The blood in his body seemed to have been light up. He seemed to see himself standing in the clouds, looking down at the world. Barely suppressing the excitement in his heart, he put away the jade stick and bowed slightly, stating seriously, Shidi will try the best. Wukong Hall. Pei Yuan Ran and Xang Yin were drinking tea. After killing Yao last time in the Ling fields, when they had the free time, they would gather to drink tea and chat. It's a pity that third Shidi isn't here. Otherwise we three would have gathered again. Pei Yuan Ran smiled. He's probably going to be busy for a while. Xang Yin drank his tea. He was different in the way he drank, completely lacking the grace and idleness that other people had. Whenever Pei Yuan Ran would pour it full for him, he would raise it and drink to the bottom, clean and crisp. After that, he poured it for himself, drinking cup after cup. Drinking like you, it really is wasting my Ling tea. Pei Yuan Ran was in pain. Xang Yin didn't even look at him, not stopping. He asked, What Tian Songzi said, how about it? Pei Yuan Ran's face became serious. It's not unreasonable. Third Shidi had been complaining a while ago that the price of Ling grains had risen astronomically. It is a little hint. How do you feel? Xang Yin stopped for the first time. He nodded his head. I feel it's true. Why? Hunting Yao is getting harder and harder. Xang Yin said. On the market, the number of Yao inner cores have become less, and the price is multiplied. I forgot that you also forge. Pei Yuan Ran nodded in agreement. It's true that there are less people willing to hunt Yao. Even those big sects, they put their direction onto searching for new Jia. The words of the two were filled with worry. 3,000 years, the Xiuzha had defeated the Yaoma. The remaining strong Yaoma had used their own bodies and blood as the guide, 7 medium Jia as the axis, 49 little Jia as the screen to create Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia. Ling energy in Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia was extremely lacking, extremely disadvantageous for Xiuzha. Yaoma, on the other hand, were not affected. This meant that Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia became the Yaoma's most trusted defensive line. But in these 3,000 years, the attacks of Xiuzha against Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia had never stopped. Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia had become a constant battlefield. Countless cultivators had become famous there. Many things on the body of Yaoma were rare materials for Xiuzha. Forging, dam making, food, it was all useful. The stronger the Yaoma, the higher the value. Therefore many people went for the Yaoma, and then this exercise had its own name, Yao Hunt. However, in the recent long period, there were less and less people going to Yao Hunt. The continuously appearing Yaoma strong masters caused the casualty rate of the cultivators in Yao Hunt to be extremely high. The risk was too high. The profits shrunk and caused the number of cultivators in Yao Hunt to decrease dramatically. And in the last few years, the active area of cultivators in Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia kept retreating. Incidents where Yaoma actively attacked Xiuzha had occurred. Everything was hinting that the Yaoma had recovered. All the cultivators who had at least some foresight were full of worry. If Yaoma could push the Xiuzha out of Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia, that meant that they could start an attack on Xiuzha at any time. There wasn't any room for diplomacy between Xiuzha and Yaoma. 3,000 years ago, the Xiuzha almost exterminated all Yaoma. Only now have they recovered, and the hatred between them were as deep as the sea. If another great war like the one that occurred 3,000 years ago happened again, not one Xiozha would be unaffected. He wants to host a Dong Fu sword test conference? Why would Tian Songzi mention Zuomo's name? Xianyan asked. He is only a Ling plant farmer. In the letter Tian Songzi gave Pei Yuanran, he said he would host a sword test conference. Inside, he had specifically mentioned Wei Sheng and Zuomo's names. Don't know. Pei Yuanran grimaced. Probably that the incident with Golden Crow Pill had been too big and attracted Tian Songzi's attention. Right, who do you feel about that youth you buy? Not bad, stronger than Luo Li. Wei Sheng. Hard to say. It seems that Tian Songzi's branch will have a successor. Pei Yuanran drawled. Zuomei Tian's disciple supposedly isn't bad. If there really is a Dong Fu sword test conference, it would be a bit interesting. Xianyan didn't speak and started to drink another cup of tea. After a while he raised his head. You agreed? No rush. Have to wait for Wei Sheng to come out of the sword cave. Even more, the sect assessment is starting. Pei Yuanran smiled. Have you heard about the matter between Luo Li and Zuomo? Winning dishonorably. Xianyan spat out. Haha, that's true. Pei Yuanran laughed. A beat later he said. Luo Li's talents isn't bad, but his personality is a bit lacking. If he's like Wei Sheng. Xianyan rolled his eyes. Don't be greedy. Haha. Pei Yuanran laughed again. Chapter 57, Like Fire 5923. Zuomo's mouth was wide as he panted heavily, his eyes bulging like a fish before death, as he stared at the ice crystal sword floating in front of him. He was like a bamboo stalk swaying in the wind, his body trembling. The clothing was soaked, pasted to his body, and revealing his thin stature. Bam, he fell down. He lost control of the ice crystal sword in midair, and with a clang, it dropped to the ground. Weakly looking at the sky, Zuomo's brain was ringing. The last bit of Ling energy had been cleanly wrung out. 5,923 times. If he sliced 4,000 more times, he would reach 10,000. He hadn't wasted his time slicing 5,923 times. Any move in Li Water Sword scripture. Right now he could unthinkingly complete it in one breath, with no pauses or raw spots. But it was only the sword moves. The sword moves were the appearance, the sword essence was the bones. Sword moves without sword essence. It was like a paper tiger, only appearing frightening. Each sword scripture, the sword essence they had was different. Even in the same sword scripture, different cultivators would form different sword essences. What Zuomo had comprehended was Xianyan Shirshu's title sword essence, and not Li Water sword essence. Only a matching sword essence could merge with the sword moves into one. When he had sliced 4,000 times, Zuomo realized this rule. The title sword essence he had secretly learned from Xianyan Shirbua. It would only have the greatest effect with its matching sword moves. He might have used the sword energy from the golden sword ring to form it one, but Zuomo postulated. It was either because the sword energy of the gold ring sword was too low, or that he had performed abnormally well that time. He had tried countless times but was still unable to merge the title sword essence into the sword moves of Li Water sword scripture. The two were like two completely different entities, unable to tolerate each other. If Zuomo hadn't comprehended a sword essence, he wouldn't be facing this problem. But after personally experiencing being sliced so many times, the power and greatness of sword essence had already been struck into his heart. A power that easily could slice a soul. Compared to that, the beautiful and grand sword moves were only pretty but not practical. Sword essence. This was undoubtedly the question he cared about the most. There wasn't much time. He had no method to rely on himself to find it, so he could only go find Pu Yao. He wanna know. Aha! Pu Yao gave an intoxicating smile. Zuomo proactively threw the jinxure that he gained from making the golden crow pills to Pu Yao. It seems that we have connected on a deeper level now. Pu Yao gave a light laugh and then said absent-mindedly. Of course the sword essence from each sword scripture is different. Do you need to think about such an idiotic question? Go comprehend Li Water sword essence. Just find a river, go look, what is water? Oh, as to fire, there it is. Zuomo scanned the surroundings. The deep red flame seemed leap to attention, the flames sprouting higher. Open your eyes and take a good look. It won't be free next time. Pu Yao's voice came out from the sea of fire. The consciousness was entirely fiery red, the flames dancing rapidly. Countless deep red flames slowly started to rise. It was like countless red flowers blooming in the sky. Each ball of flame was jumping at a certain rhythm. The outer red flames were like the tongues of snakes, spitting randomly. The whole sky was filled with balls of flames. Suddenly, they all started to head for the center. The entire process was done without a sound, like water flowing into the ocean. Not a ripple was made. An enormous flame rose in Zhuamo's sea of consciousness. It exchanged light with the star in the void. It burned quietly. None of the flame flowers could be seen. What could be seen was a red-black sun. A pure red color, as though it was made from crimson metal liquid. Some places were so red it was black. On the surface of the ball, dense flames spit and spat. Hot. Zhuamo felt as if he was in a stove. A wave of heat rushed over. His entire body seemed to be roasting over a fire. He actually felt a strong burning pain. He was stunned. Everything in the sea of consciousness wasn't material. Even he was just a bit of spirit. Like these flames in the past, no matter if they took over the consciousness, Zhuamo hadn't felt any heat. But this time, this red ball so hot it was almost black, it made him frightened. The ball of fire serenely floated in midair, burning quietly. But this quiet held agitation and danger. It made Zhuamo feel awe. The quiet here was like a thin layer of eggshell, able to break at any time. Just at this time, the ball of flame exploded without a warning. Zhuamo saw an extremely awe-inspiriting picture. Countless red-black flames flowed like a volcano's lava flows, heading in all directions. The flames were like rain. Everything that Zhuamo could see was dyed red. The countless flames colored the black sky crimson red. Big and small flames. After the shock of the initial high-speed impact, their speed slowed down. A sky full of fire flowers. They floated slowly like red dandelion seeds blown by the wind, traveling where the wind blew. The scorching heat caused the air to warp, making the scene seem unrealistic. Zhuamo stood dumbstruck in his spot. Suddenly, he remembered that black sea, the picture of the countless black dandelion seeds flying. The dark red flames jumping in air finally landed on the ground. Once they landed, it was like they grew roots and quickly spread. In the blink of an eye, Zhuamo was surrounded by a sea of fire. Everything returned to normal. But this sea of fire didn't give off a feeling of burning. He dazedly reached out a hand, and like it didn't exist, the hand traveled through the flames. Was this fire? What he had just seen gave him a shock that he had never had before. In the next few days, Zhuamo's mind was in a trance. The scene in the sea of consciousness continuously repeated in front of his eyes. Like a puppet, he lost his soul muddled. The bewitching scene full of power, every detail, it was like it was burned into his mind. Like fire. Xiaoguo wiped her sweat. Seeing that mark on the wooden board in front of her, a happy expression appeared on her naive and adorable apple face. She could send out a sword energy now. Also, this was not relying on the aid of the golden sword ring that Zhuamo Shixiang had given her, but a sword energy she had made based on her own cultivation. She had persisted in practicing the jade scroll that Zhuamo had given her last time. She didn't know how she had come through this time. The things in the jade stick were not complicated, but to a girl who had stayed in the zoo from very little, the difficulty was like trying to ascend the heavens. Sweat, tiredness, pain, incorrect, not understanding, lost. In secret, she had cried so many times that even she didn't know. Cried until her eyes were like peaches. But after crying each time, she would start practicing again. Pain, tiredness, and then cry, and then start practicing. That pair of soft and tender hands, right now it had a bit of strength and power. Shiji became an inner sect disciple. Shixiang also became an inner sect disciple. Her pink fists tightened, that pair of bright eyes full of resolve. Xiaoguo will definitely become an inner sect disciple. Before, there had been Shiji protecting her. After, it had been Shixiang. Even though Shixiang was a bit ugly, and his temper wasn't good. But unknowingly, Xiaoguo felt that this Shixiang that she was slightly afraid of became her role model. Especially when Shixiang gave the jade scrolls to her, and told her to practice hard and protect everyone else. Xiaogua made a decision. She would do her best. Tilting her head, she thought innocently. Xiaogua, Xiaogua. Someone was calling her. Hey. She hurriedly responded. A few of the Shiji ran over and said, let's go together to Dongfu. It's been so long since we went. Come with us. No one knew she was practicing sword scriptures. She would always sneak away to practice every day by herself. She really didn't want to go. She still hadn't finished her practice for today. When she was going to decline, she suddenly remembered that Shi Xiang said to her to protect everyone. When the word reached her mouth, it became N.O.K. Dongfu Hall. Yubai was reporting to Tian Songzi. The letters and invitations have all been sent out. Wukong Sword Sect and Dongqi Sword Sect. It had been this disciple personally delivering them. And it was hard for you. Tian Songzi nodded in praise. He suddenly remembered something and ordered. For the next while, make sure to control the people in the city. Pay attention that nothing will happen. Is something going to happen? Yubai hurriedly asked. Still remember the stars in daytime? Remember. Has there been any discoveries? Yubai's heart shook. That strange and odd marvel. He probably wouldn't forget it in his lifetime. The apparition of Wei Sheng's Juji had been sword energy reaching the heavens, stunning him greatly. But in comparison, that quietly appearing, stars that appeared without a sign in the sky, what he felt was a bone-aching cold. Tian Songzi shook his head. Nothing. The Jie master had scanned the entire Jie with his mind and hadn't found any abnormalities. But when Jie master asked for help from his sect, he found that stars in daytime are related to Yaomo. Yaomo? Yubai cried out. Right. But even in the oldest texts, the records about it are very vague. They only say that it is related to Yaomo. Tian Songzi's face was heavy, and he said in a deep voice. Most importantly, it is a great ominous omen. Ominous omen. Yubai's face slightly paled. Apparitions, even though they weren't common, but they would occasionally appear. When a treasure came out of the ground, when someone had a breakthrough in cultivation, forging or dam making, they all could create apparitions. But of the apparitions that could be called an ominous omen, Yubai only knew a few of them. And each one of them all meant the sky and earth changing, blood flowing in rivers. Like when a jie was going to shatter, the land would crack. Water would flow in the sky. That was an ominous omen. Under such circumstances, even those of the highest cultivation could not escape. They would be destroyed with the jie, turned to nothing. Tian Songzi sighed. The world is going to have an upheaval. Yaomo is going to rise. He glanced at Yubai and then said, do not worry too much. Yaomo is the natural enemies of all Xiuzha. On this point, no matter which sect, they would not retreat. This time, Skyguard Jie has sent quite a few strong people, who will soon arrive at Sky Moon Jie to investigate this matter. The cultivators all have high cultivation. To avoid conflict, you need to put effort into restricting the people. Don't create a disorder. Remember to notify all the sections. Yes. Yubai hurried complied. Hopefully they will resolve it. Tian Songzi muttered to himself. Yubai was silent. He didn't know how to comfort Master. Chapter 58 Terror 9411. After dazing around for 3 days, Swaemo started to furiously practice sword moves again. The picture in his sea of consciousness gave an unparalleled shock. He seemed to have understood something, but couldn't grasp it. 3 days later, he suddenly woke and understood. All kinds of comprehension. It wasn't a building in the sky. Without a solid base, even if you understood it, you could not produce it. Even more, Swaemo didn't understand sword essence completely. Wei Xing Shixiang had sat in front of the waterfall for months, battled lots of times, before he had comprehended just those basic things. His talent at the sword was far from Wei Xing Shixiang. How could it be so easy? Finally knowing where the problem was, Swaemo controlled his panicking heart and started to practice the sword moves of Li Water Sword scripture. When he was tired to his limits, his Ling energy used up, he would meditate in the rock room. Recovering, he would start again. Just like this, without a break in between. 19,022. Swaemo's clothing was torn, his body a mess, his eyes sunk deep. Only that pair of eyes were lit up like a fire, burning relentlessly. 7 moves, Each detail of each move, he had thought it over countless times. He was so familiar to a point that he couldn't even believe it. The ice crystal sword was like a part of his body. He could easily control it to do any move. That bit of consciousness, it was like a strong spider silk thread that held on to the sword. In the air, the ice crystal sword slowly wavered like a fish waving its tail as it swam against the current. The rate at which the ice crystal sword wavered continuously increased. With the ice crystal sword as the center, large circles of transparent ripples appeared in the air. Zuomo's eyes were slightly closed as he tasted the tiniest changes on the ice crystal sword. Without a sound, the ice crystal sword suddenly disappeared from its spot, only leaving behind transparent ripples that shook in the air. Ding! A sound that was the lightest possible. The ice crystal sword entered into the rock face of the valley, leaving behind a small hole. After a while, the rock surrounding the tiny hole became covered in a dense yet thin layer of ice. The sword was like water, illusory and shapeless. Zuomo closed his eyes, reminiscing on the entire process. The path the ice crystal sword had taken was actually a curve, like water flowing down a mountain, extremely natural and smooth. This move flowing water. According to the words of Li Water Sword scripture, it was a small progress. But Zuomo was very dissatisfied. If this move had sword essence, the sword would have gone beyond the 3 feet into the rock. There was someone in the valley. Zuomo felt it in his heart. In this amount of time, other than practice sword scripture, all his other time was put onto meditation. Other than the improvement of his sword scripture, his cultivation had increased ferociously. Shiji. Zuomo saw it was Li Yingfeng and got off his guard. Li Yingfeng saw Zuomo's state and jumped. Then she frowned. Shidi, fighting is important, but speed isn't everything. If you are too exhausted, it would have the opposite effect. Zuomo, I'm fine. For you. Li Yingfeng couldn't deal with Zuomo, and handed over a jade scroll. Sui Xiaoshiji came back. This is a jade scroll that she gave me. Recorded inside is one of the times that Luo Li Shixiang was fighting. If you have the time, you could take a look. Zuomo stilled. He hadn't thought that there was this matter, and couldn't help but be curious. Before Wei Sheng Shixiang had Juji, Luo Li Shixiang had always been the genius of the sect. Even Wei Sheng Shixiang was just his sword servant. Zuomo was very curious what level he really was at. Looking at Li Yingfeng Shiji, who looked slightly tired, he was grateful, and raised his hands. He said, "Many thanks, Shiji." It was just a coincidence that Sui Xiaoshiji returned. Li Yingfeng said, "Shidi needs to work hard. Not just Sui Xiaoshiji has returned. Supposedly, eldest Shiji is also returning soon." "And I will," Zuomo said resolutely. Li Yingfeng added a few more cautions before leaving. Returning to the valley, Zuomo impatiently added Ling energy to the jade scroll. It looked like the battlefield was a mine underground. The light was poor, and it was very dark. Zuomo couldn't help but furrow his brows. He didn't know if it was that he was used to sunlight, but he really didn't like this kind of dark underground place. Suppressing the dislike inside, his head turned quickly. This should be the mine that Luo Li governed. Luo Li Shixiang's personality was cold, and his relationship with the other Shixiang wasn't very good. Supervising a sect was a hard duty. It was long-term underground, dull and harsh. Other than Luo Li Shixiang, no one was willing to go. Zuomo looked extremely carefully, afraid of missing a detail. He saw a crowd of people facing Luo Li Shixiang. "Brothers, since we can't even get full, it's just a death. Rather than starve to death, we should rather fight against him." Someone shouted, but his shaking legs clearly betrayed the terror in his heart. The other people shook all over as well, but their eyes were red. Zuomo remembered that he had heard of Xiao slaves from the sound tablet. These people should be Xiao slaves. Seeing these people's eyes, Zuomo suddenly thought, when a wild animal was in desperate straits, were they like this as well? "Huangze, I promoted you to head, and you repay me like this?" Luo Li said coldly. "Head?" The leader of the crowd smiled bitterly. "Can't even live, what's the use in being the head?" The Jingshi under is becoming rare, the rules didn't chance. One piece of Jingshi exchanged for that little bit of food. We've continuous to dig down. The corrosion from the earth energy is even stronger. The month before last, 10 of us died. Last month, 30 of us died. It's only been half of this month, but 35 have already died. The crowd was very excited. The people that had been trembling were not trembling any longer. Their eyes didn't have any more terror, only rage. Luoli looked indifferently at these people. Hope. Since there isn't ing hope. The person's eyes were bloodshot as he howled. We'll just ask for an enjoyment. Enjoyment. Luoli suddenly opened coldly. Then I will give you enjoyment. As his words landed, without a warning, a bloodline appeared on the people's necks. The excited and uncontrolled people didn't detect it. Pew pew pew. Blood sprayed out from their neck. Dozens of blood pillars sprayed at the same time. The warm blood being sprayed everywhere onto the top and sides of the cavern. Large sections of red, alarming to the eye. Between the sounds of blood spraying, there was the sound of rolling. The heads of these Shio slaves rolled beside the feet of their corpses. Dozens of corpses were standing as they sprayed blood. The heads by the feet were perfect and untouched, the features clear. It was even possible to see the expression and large eyes of these Shio slaves before their death. After a while, these headless corpses finally fell down. Arg! Seeing this, Zwamo's chest started to roil. He couldn't contain it, and crouching on the ground, he started to throw up. He had never thought that one day, he would see such a terrifying and bloody picture. His body tightened. Was that person like a monster, uncaring of other people's live? Was that Luo Li Shixiang? A long time ago, he had heard that Luo Li Shixiang's temper wasn't good, but now he understood that Luo Li Shixiang's bad temper was very different than the one he understood. Shio slaves, were they Shio slaves? But why did Shio slaves seem no different than him? This thought only flashed in his mind. Zuemo had never thought he was a person that bemoaned the state of the universe and pitted others. In his perspective, he had no qualification to pity others. He himself was struggling at the lowest level of society. Even though he was now an inner sect disciple, a Ling plant farmer, but he was still only a little person. His gaze landed on those corpses, the heads and the fresh blood that had sprayed everywhere. Shixiang's gaze was cold and indifferent. The picture in front of his eyes, it seemed to be a very normal thing in the eyes of Shixiang. Zuaimo felt that he was shuddering, trembling, unable to control his fear. In these 2 years he spent every day in the Ling fields. He had never thought that one day, he would face fresh blood and corpses. Would Luoli, during the sect assessment, kill him off? Or take off one of his limbs? Zuamo's brain turned to a mess. Terror spread through his entire body, like the red-black fire in his sea of consciousness. He was afraid. Heavy Sword Hall was the place that Qin Cheng resided in normally, even though he had left for a time, but someone still had taken care of it. Inside the hall, everyone was in a pile, extremely lively. Qin Cheng smiled. Us brothers, it's been so long since we gathered. Being able to gather today, we should drink. Sui hurriedly waved his hand. TT, we're not drinking wine. A green-clad female sat beside Sui, delicate and adorable. She was Sui Xia. She mischievously poked out her tongue. Second Shixiang is still this weak, no improvement. Sui was helpless against his shimmy. Sui Xia was naughty and adorable, her personality cheerful, and understood how to gain the affections of the elders. She was the most favored one of the disciples. Sui had suffered on her hands, and could only grimace. Luoli sat on the side, unconcernedly drinking tea, his face cold. Hao Min sat beside him. At this time she couldn't help say, "It's great that everyone has returned. If you haven't returned, those bastards would have climbed onto our heads." Hearing Hao Min's unpleasant words, Sui and Sui Xia's expression became slightly irritated. Shimmy shall not speak nonsense. We are all disciples of the same sect. If the sect leader heard, you will be punished again. Qin Cheng berated. He had always been authoritative. Hearing this, Hao Min could only stay quiet. However, Qin Cheng's tone turned as he looked at everyone else. We know each other and grew up together. We are like brothers. Helping each other, that's reasonable. He continued. The elders have their own ideas, but we have our own feelings. Everyone nodded. They had grown up together from little. Having someone else entering, they naturally were unwilling. Hee. Suyai Xia said naughtily. Exactly. Even though Luo Li Shixiang has a cold face all the time, But I will still help you. I gave that jade stick where Shixiang killed 30 Xiao slaves with one sword to Liang Feng. It must be on the little zombie's hands by now. How can you reveal your Shixiang sword moves? Hearing this, Hao Min was enraged. Su Yixia wasn't scared of Hao Min at all. She helplessly rolled her eyes. This is called a mental attack. That little zombie, he just farms. Where would he have seen something like that? Even I was scared half to death seeing it. I'm guessing that he'll just faint. Putting down a seed of fear in his ear, he will. Luo Li suddenly stood up. His face dark, he said in a cold voice. Against a Ling plant farmer, do I Luo Li need such cheap tricks? Finishing, his head not turning back, he left. Chapter 59 Practicing Sword in the Waters. Wemo was stunned. The picture inside the jade scroll gave him an earth-shattering shock. The following days he would wake up at night. The bloody and terrifying scene tormented him like a nightmare. In the Ling fields he dazedly sat, his mind unfocused, his complexion extremely poor. Looking at the Ling grasses and herbs that were growing well in the fields, he suddenly felt that his life had changed a lot, completely different than before. Why was it like that? He asked himself. He suddenly remembered that strange dream that had puzzled him for 2 years. The slightly familiar voice in the dream. Unconsciously, he couldn't help compare the nightmare of the last 2 days to the frequently repeating dream. Compared to the nightmare of the last few days, the usual dream didn't have a bit of blood. But whenever he was shocked awake, it was like he had been lifted out of the water, his entire body soaked. It clearly wasn't a bloody and scary dream, but it always made him so nervous, terrified. Yes, terrified. When he woke, other than sweat, there was also his stiff body. He didn't know when he was dreaming what his sleeping body was like. But undoubtedly, he was definitely afraid. But he didn't know what he was afraid of. That dream, it was the reason that he was pursuing power. He believed that there was really something behind the dream, that you must not forget even in death. Damn it, what is it? Suddenly the blood and the headless corpses became less scary in Zhuomo's eyes. For some reason, the frequent yet not scary dream, the terror that it brought Zhuomo far outweighed those bloody scenes. What was he doing? Zhuomo suddenly seemed to have woken up. He hit his head heavily. Why did he get scared by just that scene? To search for the answer, wasn't he willing to put his life on the line? This world. What was more frightening than having the same dream repeating each night? This world. What was more frightening than clearly knowing you had something important you shouldn't forget, but could not remember? What was more frightening than have your features changed and mind erased, but you were still safe? Zhuomo's blank eyes slowly focused, his eyes resuming clarity and brightness. What was he afraid of? Wasn't it just his life? He told himself inside. If he wanted to search for answer, he would definitely encounter people countless times more dangerous and more powerful. If he couldn't get through this barrier, if he retreated from this step, how could he search for answers? The person who changed his features and erased his mind was a powerful person, who even Master was wary of. Zhuomo stood up. After thinking it through, his mind became clear. Unknowingly, his mental state and cultivation improved hugely. He had comprehended something. Cultivation, it was to have a steady heart and not waver. Once again, he took up the ice crystal sword, once again starting to practice. There wasn't loss, there wasn't confusion. He was even more hardworking than before. He needed to catch up all the time he had wasted previously. In the time of 2 months, Zhuomo didn't leave the mountain valley. Seeing that there was only 1 month until the sect assessment, Zhuomo still didn't have any hint of the Li water sword essence. 20,001. The familiarity of the sword moves had progressed to an abnormal level. Zhuomo was suspicious that even the person who made this sword scripture wasn't as familiar as him on the sword moves. 7 sword moves. He had changed it 12 times. Countless practice allowed him to know every detail of the sword moves like the back of his hand. The places where he made alterations, it was places that he thought the sword move would become more logical and effective. Even though he was very uncertain, he still made the change. He was extremely cautious and prudent about the 12 changes. Each change, he had spent large amounts of effort, practicing over and over to confirm before finally clinching it. On the sword moves, there wasn't any more possible progress. When he realized this, there was only 1 month until the sect assessment. He decided to do something different. There was a large river below Wukong Mountain. The records room of Wukong Mountain had been built beside the cliff. This river couldn't be considered wide, but it ran fast. The locals called it sky-shaking rivers. Wuxia came to the shore. Looking at the rushing water, he gritted his teeth, and carrying the ice crystal sword, he jumped into the river. Entering the river, he felt the surroundings become quiet. The rapid river water almost swept him off his feet. He forced himself to steady and started to do the sword moves of Li Water Sword Scripture in the water. This was the solution he had thought of. Just when he didn't know what to do, he suddenly remembered a sentence that Pu Yao had said. Pu Yao said for him to find a river and see what water was like. Because what he had seen in his sea of consciousness had been too shocking, he had simply forgotten Pu Yao's words. Only yesterday did he remember. In the past, practicing finger motions in the water was also this method, and it allowed his finger motions improve rapidly. Actually, where he wanted to go was the large waterfall that Wei Xing Shixiang had written about, but there wasn't enough time. With no other alternative, he could only choose the sky-shaking river under the mountain to cultivate. The sky-shaking river, while not as large as the large waterfall, the currents were extremely rapid, and because there was a dense layer of rock on the riverbed, there were countless whirlpools in the undercurrent. If he wasn't careful, it was extremely easy to be washed away by the water. Zhuo cultivated embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, and his breathing was unique compared to normal people. This allowed him to be able to stay under the water for a longer period of time. If one hadn't practiced spells like Art of Water Manipulation, they couldn't stay long in the water. Of course, if they had talismans such as a water bubble, then it was a whole other discussion. Zhuo had broken through to one breath in the cold pond, and wasn't afraid of water. But the restless river water, and the silent and icy pond water, gave Zhuo completely different feelings. The cold pond in Cold Mist Valley was like a bottomless hole. Sinking down, it was like entering a silent world, everything on the outside blocked off. There were no currents, no whirlpools. The further down, the more the coldness could be felt. It just silently released its will. And sky-shaking river, jumping in, Zhuo felt he went from a noisy world into another noisy world. The slapping of the current, the sound of the foams, the innumerable undercurrents and eddies deep down, it pulled on everything in the river. It was like a wild stallion, violent and mad, completely lacking the serenity of water. It was continuously roaring, surging endlessly. He quickly felt it a strain. The so-called manipulation of sword. It meant using a strand of spirit to control the flying sword. A sword that had been impressed would have the unique impression of the owner's spirit. And the owner only needed to maneuver one strand of spirit to control the flying sword. They also didn't have to worry that their sword would be controlled by someone else. But in the water, using the spirit to maneuver the sword became much more difficult. Especially since the flow of Ling energy was also affected. It wasn't easy in the first place to get to a calm mind. Due to the undercurrents at the bottom of the river, the water flowed quickly. No matter if the body was controlled in the water, there was still the feeling of countless hands pulling at the body. This effect of this outside force easily distracted cultivators. And any change in the Ling energy would create a huge perturbation for the flying sword. The smooth sword moves that were so familiar on land, not one of them could be completed in sky-shaking river. Zhuo's eyes couldn't help but light up. What he was afraid of was he would not know how to continue, just like someone who wanted to dig a mountain road. What he was most afraid of being ignorant of which direction to dig, not knowing his own location. And if he knew where he was, even if there was a mountain blocking, Zhuo wasn't afraid. He had a feeling he found the right path. He started to faithfully practice his Li Water Sword Scripture. Li Water Sword Scripture was a water element sword scripture. When it was done on the ground, it would have a faint water vapor. But in the water, the power of Li Water Sword Scripture increased exponentially. It didn't need much Ling energy to have multiple shapeless water swords spreading out in the water. Zhuo felt that it was like he was an infant holding an axe. One careless mistake, if it wasn't too much strength, it was a wrong direction. Adding on the battering of the river water, the disturbance of the currents and eddies, his sword moves were hurtful to the eyes. But he wasn't discouraged. He started to scrupulously practice Li Water Sword scripture. After a few days, what Zuemo felt most profoundly about wasn't his sword moves, but the imprinting method of Li Water Sword scripture. The Li Water Sword scripture's imprinting method for the sword was to nurture one drop of water essence in the flying sword. It could respond to the Li Water Sword scripture, not just aiding in the manipulation, the strength also increased. How could the humidity on the land be as plentiful as in the river? Zuemo had practiced for so long in the yard, but the amount of water essence he had accumulated was far less than what he got these few days. Before, the water crystal in the ice crystal sword was the size of a mung bean. It was now the size of a soybean, and the appearance of that water essence droplet in the ice crystal sword was different at the core. The previous water essence droplet, it had been created from the water from the valley. There were large amounts of ling grasses and herbs growing in the valley that affected the water vapor in the valley. The water essence formed before was gentle and full of vitality, but the enlarged water essence was created by extracting the essence from the sky-shaking river. It held some of the attributes of the sky-shaking river. The warm quality had vanished, and it became hyperactive. This change was both good and bad. The good was that it was much stronger than before. The bad was the ease of manipulation wasn't as good as before. Evaluating it, Zuemo still felt the present state wasn't bad. The water essence droplet had gotten much larger. As to purity, it needed to be refined slowly. The next 7 days, Zuemo was almost always practicing in the water. He could stay for a long time in the water, but due to the fact that the ling energy used underwater was multiple times what was used on land, after practicing for a length of time, he had to meditate to recover ling energy. But the river was very far from the rock room, and it would be extremely eye-catching to travel back. Zuemo decided to meditate in the river. Zuemo had never tried before to meditate in the river, much less such a strong river. Quite a few times he wasn't successful. After failing over 10 times, he finally managed to grasp the trick and started to meditate in the water. He didn't know that staying in such a special environment in the water was extremely helpful for his embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Unknowingly, his embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation broke into second breath. In his sea of consciousness, another star appeared, but this star was dull and colorless, far less blinding than the other one. Chapter 60 Comprehension. The rushing river water roared thunderously, creating large patches of snow-white foam. Occasionally, leaves and wood would be pulled in and disappear in the blink of an eye. Under the roaring surface, Zuemo, half-naked, had a serious expression on his face. In front of him, several water swords intersected and wove in the water. When fish and shrimp were thrown into this, they were killed without a mark. Zuemo didn't rest or sleep. Without pausing, he furiously practiced the sword 33,600. The ice crystal sword was like the nimblest of fish, cheerfully swimming easily in the water. The speed was fast like lightning, shaming those fish that were renowned for speed. Zuemo stopped. He might be exhausted, and his mind was pretty much at its limits, but he didn't slack off in the slightest. His eyes were full of tiredness, but he tried to widen time, almost as though he was afraid if his eyes accidentally would close. Tired, he knew he had reached a barrier. The 7 moves of Li Water Sword scripture. The first 6 moves, he didn't have any problems. The problem came on the 7th move. The first 6 moves it flowed, or turned like a whirlpool. It mimicked the uniqueness of water, each move having a unique attribute. Zuemo was able to understand that. However, even now, Zuemo did not get the 7th move. Before on land, he had felt that he was extremely familiar with the 7th move, but when he got into the water, he felt that it was incorrect. The name of the 7th move was slightly scary. It was called Li Water Burning Heavens. Zuemo felt that if the name was changed to Li Fire Burning Heavens, he could still understand. But Li Water, that was still water. How could it burn the heavens? This move was one that wounded both sides. It required putting all the ling energy into the flying sword, stimulating that drop of water essence in the flying sword. The sword presence would reverse against the current and attack the enemy. This move had many difficult places, like putting in all the Ling energy at one moment into the flying sword. This was a test of a person's control of Ling energy, and stimulating that water essence drop in the flying sword. Swaemo didn't dare test it rashly. It had been hard to form this one drop in the first place. If it exploded, Swaemo wouldn't just have to reform this water essence drop, but even the inner formations of the ice crystal sword might be damaged. And what Swaemo felt the least logical was the presence of this last move. The presence of the previous 6 moves, it flowed, it curved, it spun. But only this last one, Swaemo couldn't understand. Going against the current. How could water go against the current? What this Li water sword scripture mimicked was water. Swaemo understood what kind of water was Li water, but at the end, it was still water. As long as it was water, how could it flow from low places to high places? How could it go against the current and up? But Li water sword scripture just had to have this move, and it had to be the last move. When Swaemo had been practicing on land, he hadn't felt it. In that case, the water essence drop in the sword had been as light as air. It really couldn't be felt when the sword was swung. But practicing in the water pressure caused the presence of the sword to become heavy as well. The problem that couldn't be seen was magnified. No matter how hard Swaemo tried, he just couldn't complete this final move. Whenever he was halfway, he would feel the presence of the sword suddenly falter, and could not continue. Adding on that, Swaemo didn't dare to rashly force the water essence drop in the sword to explode. This sword was even more difficult. Since it was so difficult even in practice, like this, Swaemo was stuck on this last move. He could only continue to practice the first 6 moves. As he became more familiar with the first 6 moves, his feeling in the water, especially his feeling of water, became much clearer. The first 6 moves became increasingly smooth. Swaemo gradually comprehended it. This feeling was wondrous beyond imagining. It was like looking through a paper window to see the people inside the room. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not poke through that thin paper. Swaemo knew, the more it was like this, the more he couldn't rush. This was a sign of a breakthrough. But looking at time slipping away, as it neared the time of the set assessment, Swaemo couldn't help but become panicked. He was very clear. His first 6 moves were very familiar, but to use these 6 moves to defeat Luo Li Shixiang, that was just a dream. Sword moves, cultivation, battle experience, both sides weren't on the same level. It wasn't just 10,000 miles that Swaemo was behind the other. The only possible way to defeat Luo Li Shixiang was to comprehend the sword essence of Li water sword scripture. Because he knew that Luo Li Shixiang hadn't comprehended sword essence yet. This was the only place he could use. This was also the only place that he won over Luo Li. He had once comprehended sword essence. This was the place that he had gambled everything on. Sword essence, it was hard to describe, intangible, but it became the last trick that Swaemo was relying on. If he could not comprehend sword essence, everything else was just a waste. He definitely would lose. Did he really need to use the last move? Swaemo couldn't help but hesitate. There was only 7 days until the sect assessment. If he really exploded the water essence this time, and an accident happened, then he wouldn't even have the time to attempt a rescue. The time of 7 days, Swaemo wasn't certain if he could still form another whole water essence drop. But quickly Swaemo became stubborn. If he couldn't comprehend Li water sword essence before the sect assessment, then there was no hope of winning over Luo Li Shixiang. Then he would only have one outcome: loss. Taking a risk and failing, it was a loss. Not risking it, it also would be a loss. Swaemo gritted his teeth. In any case, the barefoot weren't afraid than those wearing shoes. If he really lost, he wouldn't say anything. He just wasn't as good as the other. He'll just have to pay some contribution points. But that was better than not even having the courage to try, and admitting defeat. In any case, the barefoot wasn't afraid of those wearing shoes. At this point, Swaemo's emotions about Luo Li had become faint. This barrier, it was more like a test for himself. And he chose to gamble. He didn't start immediately, but entered mediation to recover Ling energy. He decided to be in the best state possible when he tried the move. 6 hours later, Suemo opened his eyes, the light flashing deep in the pupils, serene and steady. He didn't know if it was the fact that he had made a decision, but the effect of the mediation this time was very good. Not only did his Ling energy recover, but the exhaustion of the past days had been swept away. Recovering the best possible state, Suemo stretched out his body. This time, he didn't use his consciousness to control the sword. Rather, he gripped the ice crystal sword with his hand. The ice crystal sword was icy when it entered his hand, like he was gripping an icicle. This bit of coldness followed Suemo's hand and quickly entered Suemo's body. He felt his mind clear. So this sword had such an ability. Suemo couldn't help regret not examining this sword a bit more in the past. But quickly he calmed his mind. These questions were for the future. Closing his eyes as he gripped the sword and focused, his feet were floating as he stood in the water. The rushing water currents could not affect his body. It was like a piece of wood standing straight in the rushing water, motionless, unspeakably strange. Remembering every detail of practicing these past days, savoring the feeling of the water rushing past the body, feeling the presence of the water essence drop in the flying sword, Suemo relaxed his mind. When everything, all the memories, all the feelings gathered together, it seemed like a certain nerve in Suemo's head was suddenly plucked by an invisible hand. Suemo suddenly opened his eyes. Li! A deep thunderous sound came out of his chest. The rushing river suddenly stopped. No current, no eddies. The water around Suemo's body seemed to have quieted all of a sudden, motionless. Just at this time, the ice crystal sword that Suemo had been grasping slowly rose up. Suemo's expression looked extremely laborious. The tendons in his forehead were bulging, his eyes angry and wide, his hair standing on end. The ice crystal sword on his hand seemed to weigh 1,000 caddies. Just raising it up a bit became extremely hard. What Suemo saw was another picture. When the Ling energy in his entire body flowed like a flood into the ice crystal sword, that water drop which usually was lively, suddenly exploded open. Boom! Suemo's mind shook. He seemed to see that soybean-sized water essence explode into countless water droplets like a mist. Suddenly, Suemo remembered what he had seen in his consciousness. That crimson-red fireball floating in the sky and suddenly exploding. That was so similar to this right now. Manipulate water like fire. This phrase that he had never understood, like lightning, it pierced into his soul. Suddenly he understood. That thin white paper that had been blocking him all this time was gently broken. A brand new world floated in front of him. In his eyes, those water droplets that formed a mist turned into flames. These flames, it wasn't the red-black flames in his consciousness, but transparent water flames. Flowering, transparent flames composed out of water. They slowly jumped, clear and colorless. Not as wild and enchanting like the dark red flames in the consciousness. These clear water flames were as serene as the noble women in their chambers. They covered the entire body of the ice crystal sword. Suemo's hand that held the ice crystal sword slowly rose. All the river water in the surroundings furiously flowed towards the ice crystal sword, seeming to form a gigantic water flame. Once the strange water flame formed, Suemo's trembling and tired arm quickly became abnormally steady. The sword presence seemed to have lost its reticence and suddenly sped up. Boom! The little ice crystal sword, carrying countless water flames made up of the river water, sliced towards the sky. At the same time, on Wukong Mountain, Xanyan suddenly opened his eyes. His body flashed, disappearing from his spot, and appearing on the cliff of the records room. He looked dazedly at the sky-shaking river below. A flow of water that seemed to form a gigantic flame roared as it flowed up against the sky. The impure river flame, at this time, it was spitting like water, burning and explosive. Who was practicing? To be able to form sword essence, the talent wasn't bad. And such an unique sword essence, he had never seen it before. He could see it clearly. This gigantic water flame. It was restrained by countless sword essences, because it was an explosive water bomb. Suddenly, he thought of a certain sword scripture in the records room, and his expression changed. Was it a disciple of the sect? Just as he paused, the water flame that had flew up suddenly exploded. At the bottom, Swaemo saw the beautiful water flame in the sky. He wanted to laugh, but he had used up all the Ling energy in his body. His eyes suddenly became unfocused. Boom! The water flame exploded in the sky, thousands of caddies of water pouring down. Swaemo didn't manage to anchor himself, and in the blink of an eye, was flushed away. Chapter 61. Planning. Swaemo wiped river water off his face, his steps uneven as he climbed up the shores of the river. He hadn't thought that Li water-burning heavens would form into a flood and carry him, who had been in a weak state, a few hundred miles away. One Li water-burning heaven. It had wrung out all the Ling energy in his body. At that time, he didn't even have the energy to breathe, much less get out of the flood. He could only be like a piece of wood and try to stay afloat. Rocks were dense along this sky-shaking river. Swaemo had suffered much as he kept on banging into those stones. Not one part of his body was unharmed. A few hundred miles. In terms of distance, it wasn't that far. But Swaemo didn't even have a paper crane. As to the female gray-beaked goose, she couldn't be depended on. And his entire body, he only had his pants and no money at all. Collapsing on a rock beside the shore, Swaemo weakly panted. But there was joy in his eyes. Sword essence, Li water sword essence. He finally formed Li water sword essence. Even if he only just touched the surface of sword essence, and wasn't in any way profound. But as long as he persisted, his skill with this sword scripture would naturally deepen with time. What was even more of a joy to him was the water essence drop inside the ice crystal sword didn't disappear, but actually became slightly bigger. It was now about the size of a pinky. He didn't hesitate, struggling up, coiling his legs to meditate. For hours later, he opened his eyes and jumped up from the ground. Controlling the ice crystal sword, he started to go through the moves of Li water sword scripture. Previously, his moves had been smooth and connected. Right now it seemed traceless. Yet a faint fire-like sword essence spread out, the temperature of the surroundings leaping up. A new world was in front of him, one move after another. His expression solemn, his moves following his thoughts. He could feel that with each move, with the ice crystal sword as the center, a faint water presence would spread. If one looked closely, they would find this water presence was formed from blossoms of extremely tiny water-like flames. In Swaemo's consciousness, that ruler straight ice river had completely transformed. The middle of the river split the river in half. One side full of icicles moving relentlessly, and the other side was countless water flames silently burning. Swaemo felt that he had improved. The Li water sword essence he comprehended this time was completely different than the tidal sword essence he had comprehended before. With the tidal sword essence, rather than saying comprehension, it was more like mimicking. And for Li water sword essence, even though there was Pu Yao's guidance and advice, but he had gone through the entire process by himself bit by bit. The benefits he had received were much more than before. The ice crystal sword flipped and flew, its trajectory traceless, the fire-like sword essence burning. But gradually, Swaemo couldn't help but furrow his brows. The Li water sword essence was like fire. The heat that was released would logically increase the power of his sword moves, but to the ice crystal sword, it was a kind of damage. The ice crystal sword was een and cold. It originally was very suited to water element sword scriptures, but what Swaemo picked had to be Li water sword scripture, which called for manipulating water like fire. Over time, the grade of this flying sword would probably drop. It looked like that he needed a flying sword suited for him. Swaemo muttered inside. He quickly threw the problem to one side. Flying swords were expensive. They weren't something he could buy now. But now that he had comprehended sword essence, the sect, in any case, should give him a flying sword. With the sect's stores, to pick a flying sword suited for him, it shouldn't be too difficult. Manipulating the sword, Swaemo didn't feel any tiredness at all, but rather extremely refreshed. Even though he was bony and was just wearing some pants, but standing there, he did seem somewhat intimidating. However, the most pressing problem he faced was getting back to the sect. Luckily it wasn't that far. Even if he had to walk, just a day was enough. Wukong sword sect was a mess. In Wukong Hall, people came in and out, Everyone was preparing for the sect assessment that was coming in a few days. Inside Wukong Hall, Shifeng Rong faced Xianyan angrily. You actually watched as he was swept away? There was none of the usual coldness on Xianyan's face. He carefully said, the circumstances at that time were outside my expectations. I didn't think he would be swept away by the water. When I managed to react, he was already gone. He's a ling plant farmer. If something happened, humph. Shifeng Rong's anger didn't decrease as she snorted icily. Shimmy, don't worry too much. Xianyan smiled as he comforted. Now that he has comprehended sword essence, in this area around Dongfu, where would there be any problems? Hearing this, Shifeng Rong's anger finally decreased. She turned around. Did he really comprehend sword essence? 3 months, that's not bad. Which sword scripture did he choose? Empty sword scripture, or shapeless sword scripture? Xianyan saw Shifeng Rong's face relaxed and released a breath inside. Smiling, he responded. He just entered the inner sect. How could he pick empty sword scripture and shapeless sword scripture? What he picked was Li Water sword scripture. I actually hadn't recognized it in the beginning. Hearing this, Shifeng Rong's features tensed again. So what if he just entered the inner sect? How long has Wei Xing entered the inner sect? Humph, Wei Xing is able to enter the sword cave. Why can't he choose empty sword scripture and shapeless sword scripture? Xianyan grimaced inside, but his mouth went. Wei Xing has outstanding talent. Shifeng Rong broke through. And Zuomo's talent isn't enough? Not good enough talent. In 3 months with no guidance, and is able to comprehend sword essence? Go see if anyone else can do it. Even now, Luo Li hasn't comprehended sword essence. Yes. Xianyan was so regretful his intestines were green. Suddenly, the two heard someone come near, and they resumed their usual cold composure. Pei Yuanran walked in. Seeing the two, the corners of his mouth rose slightly, but then resumed normal. He said, what are Second Shidi and Shimmy discussing here? Nothing. Shimmy's disciples Wuemo just comprehended sword essence. Xianyan's face was cool as he replied. No trace remaining of his carefulness, just a moment ago. Oh, Pei Yuanran was slightly surprised. He comprehended sword essence? I didn't think he had talent for cultivating the sword. Not bad. Where is he now? This should be rewarded. He was practicing in the river. When he comprehended sword essence, he was swept away by the water. I didn't pay attention and couldn't rescue him. Xianyan said. That's fine. If Zuomo could comprehend sword essence, then he doesn't need to worry about safety around Dongfu. Pei Yuanran mused and then said. And arrange for some outer sect disciples to search along the river. Make sure he doesn't miss the time of the sect assessment. Yes. Xianyan answered. Sect leader Xixiang. Shifeng Rong opened coolly. What? Pei Yuanran smiled. Zuomo could comprehend sword essence in 3 months. It's enough to show he has talent in the sword. Shifeng Rong said as she stared at Pei Yuanran. If that's the case, the sect should pass on a higher grade sword scripture. Pei Yuanran said. There's no rush, let's discuss this later. Why? Shifeng Rong took a step forwards, demanding. At the side, Xianyan saw Pei Yuanran being pressured and sympathy formed in his eyes. Pei Yuanran said helplessly. Wasn't Shimmy also worried about his birth? Shifeng Rong was silent for a beat. Then she raised her head, saying, when he was entering the inner sect, I was worried about his birth and history. But he is now my disciple. No matter how he was before, I would do my best to guide him. Pei Yuanran and Xianyan exchanged a look. Both of them were very helpless. Shimmy is reasonable. Pei Yuanran said. But this is really not the time to discuss this matter. I came today to find Shidi and Shimmy for another matter to discuss. Shifeng Rong and Xianyan waited for him to continue. You have already been informed about the matter of the Dongfu Sword Test Conference. Pei Yuanran's face was grave. This is one point. I hadn't thought that Zuomo would do well before, but now that he has comprehended sword essence, we should nurture him well. The other matter, Tian Songzi has sent a message. A group of strong cultivators are coming to our Jia to investigate the stars in daytime. Dongfu is one of the 13 primary towns of Sky Moon. We cannot avoid people coming to investigate. We have to control our sect and stop them from getting into trouble in the next while. How many are coming? Xian Yin heard that there were strong people, and his pupil shrunk to a needlepoint, his sword essence vibrating. Shitty, don't make a mess. This group is coming down from the upper levels. Pei Yuan Ran said solemnly. Xian Yan's features moved. Coming from the upper levels? He then grimaced. Looks like this matter has made a really big furor. Everyone knows what's going on. Pei Yuan Ran said. What Tian Songzi can see, many other people can also clearly see. But right now the Yama are rising. Who touches first, that's the one that's unfortunate. Speaking, his tone became cold. Luo Li's expression was calm as he stood. In front of him, Qin Cheng's face is serious. Shitty, careful. As the words landed, he swept his hand, and a dark light shot towards Luo Li. There was a sliver of lightning contained in the dark light. The aura extremely intimidating, with the sound of thunder. What Qin Cheng practiced was wind and thunder sword scripture. The sword was like wind and thunder, the power frightening. He didn't have as outstanding a talent as Luo Li, but after practicing for a long time, he was extremely solid. When he attacked, the wind and thunder formed. His flying sword was a third-grade black thunder sword. The sword body was thick, containing thunder ore, extremely suited for wind and thunder sword scripture. Due to the weight of the flying sword, Qin Cheng's wind and thunder sword scripture lost a bit of nimbleness and had an additional kind of weight and heaviness. Adding on the lightning flickering, the power actually increased. Luo Li stared at the black light, not dodging, and then the light in his eyes flashed. Ding! A clear sound. The 1,000 heavy black thunder sword actually stopped right in the air. Without any warning, without any decrease in speed. It was like that someone suddenly cast a body paralysis curse on the black thunder sword, pinning it in the air. Qin Cheng's expression changed. He snorted coldly, and the paralyzed black thunder sword suddenly jumped, like a fish leaping out of the water. The lightning that had been on the surface of the sword suddenly gathered into a ball, and left the sword. As it left the black thunder sword, it turned into a lightning sword. The lightning sword suddenly grew in size in the air, transforming into a gigantic lightning sword that was several feet as it sliced towards Luo Li. Luo Li's expression was serene as he pointed with a finger and swiped gently at the air. Right in front of the gigantic lightning sword, a crack suddenly appeared. It was as though Luo Li's action had broken through space. Without any time for adjustments, the lightning sword ran into the crack. Qin Cheng's face suddenly changed. He lost his connection with the gigantic lightning sword. He was dumbstruck for a few moments. Refocusing, he could not keep his usual calm composure, and asked in a trembling voice. Void sword scripture? This is void sword scripture? Chapter 62. Lin Qian. Luo Li was both proud and regretful as he shook his head. This isn't the real void sword scripture. Reconstructing void sword scripture, how can it be this easy? Qin Cheng quickly recovered and sighed. So strong even when it is incomplete. How strong would the complete void sword scripture be? He couldn't help but look at the place where the lightning had disappeared. That crack and the lightning had both disappeared without a trace. The founder was mysterious and strong. Even one as proud as Luo Li was in awe of the sect's founder. Shitty, shouldn't underestimate yourself. Just 3 months. For Shitty to accomplish so much, Shixiang really hadn't got the wrong person. Qin Cheng's eyes were full of satisfaction. Really makes one want to see. If Shitty has to face Wei Sheng, how much is the chance of winning? Luo Li's hands unconsciously tightened into fists, flames barely perceptible burning in his cold eyes. Just a sword servant that wants to climb on top of my head. He doesn't know what he's getting into. Haha, after another few days, it would be the sect assessment. Shitty, get justice for Shimmy. I saw that Shimmy's mood these days hasn't been good. Qin Cheng said. Pity that Wei Sheng can't catch the sect assessment. Otherwise it would be spectacular. Luo Li had never paid attention to Zuamo. His goal was Wei Sheng. He said frigidly. In the end he has to come out. Qin Cheng contentedly left Luo Li's place. When he was returning to his own residence, He saw many outer sect disciples with different expressions. When those outer sect disciples saw Qin Cheng, they hurriedly stopped and bowed. Eldest Shixiang, what matter has you all so busy? Qin Cheng asked. The outer sect disciples exchanged looks. A moment later, one person said, Zuemo Shixiang was practicing in the river and accidentally was swept away by the water. The sect leader ordered us to search along the river. Hearing this, Qin Cheng laughed. He waved his hand. And do what you need to do. It was as though these outer sect disciples had been pardoned from execution, as they hurriedly left. They weren't dumb. They didn't want to get involved in the battle between the inner sect disciples. Qin Cheng leisurely walked along, finding it increasingly humorous. To get swept away by the water when practicing in the river. Such a humorous thing. He had never heard something like that before. This Zuemo was really amusing. He unconcernedly threw the incident to the back of his mind. Zuemo didn't have any position in his mind. In his mind, ling plant farmers might be important, but in this era of sword cultivators dominating, only those without ambition would go farm. The person he was truly concerned with was Wei Sheng. Only this person would affect his position. Before Wei Sheng had appeared, his position was rock steady. From a long time ago, he had thought himself the next sect leader of Wukong sword sect. But he would have never thought that along the way, a Wei Sheng would appear out of nowhere and be so strong as to easily threaten his position. He was extremely cunning and experienced. He knew that there would be someone other than him that would not like Wei Sheng to prosper even more. That was Luo Li. For someone as proud as Luo Li Shidi, how could he tolerate someone who had previously been his sword servant suddenly climb on top of his head? That was even more uncomfortable than killing him. A cold smile floated on top of Qin Cheng's face. He wasn't one person. These inner sect disciples that had climbed up from the outer sect directly affected the privileges of the original inner sect disciples. It wasn't just him that had an opinion. Even the sect leader had to take their opinions into account. Zuemo walked along the major road. His upper half was bare. A pant was the only thing left on his lower half, his foot also bare. When the people on the road saw him, they all had strange expressions. But seeing the ice crystal sword he held in his hand, no one dared to laugh. Zuemo didn't know where this place was. Only after he asked someone did he know that there was about 500 miles from here to Dongfu. Zuemo grimaced inside. He hadn't thought that he would be swept 500 miles by the river water. Thankfully, 500 miles wasn't that far for him. Now that his cultivation had increased, the speed he traveled at had increased as well. He decided that, when he reached the 5th level of Zhuji, he would go learn a flying spell. If he met similar circumstances in the future, he wouldn't have to rely on his 2 legs. But he wasn't in a rush. He had asked a few people, and all of them said as long as he followed the road forward, he would reach Dongfu. When he reached Dongfu, then it wouldn't be far from Wukong Mountain. As he walked, he thought about what he had learned these days. He didn't feel tired. He had just made a breakthrough. It was still indistinct in many places. There were many things that he needed to get used to. Even though he traveled along, Zuemo didn't find it dull. This brother, sorry to disturb. May I ask what is in this direction? Zuemo, deep in his thoughts, was interrupted by an unfamiliar voice. He was slightly discontent as he raised his head. When he raised his head, he instantly was dumbstruck. How in this damned world is there a man more handsome than Ji? This thought came out instinctively. Handsome, too handsome. This male was of similar height to him. A strong brow and sharp eyes, extremely masculine. Clad in white, he seemed ethereal and casual. If Pu Yao's handsomeness was androgynous, then this male's handsomeness was overwhelmingly male. This was the first time that Zuemo saw someone who could compare to Pu Yao in the area of beauty. He looked at himself. A skeletal body, ripped pants, zombie face. Zuemo was uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Who are you? What are you doing here? Zuemo dragged out his voice, glancing at the other out of the corner of his eye, as though this place was his backyard. The other raised his hands in a fist, bowing. This little brother is Lin Qian, having sightseen to this place, but doesn't know the location. Please brother, tell me. Lin Qian? Definitely a fake gentleman. Zuemo slandered inside. Sightseeing? Zuaemo examined the other, and then reached out with his right hand, rubbing his thumb and middle finger. That eternally unchanging zombie face actually had a "you understand" expression. Lin Qian paused. Looking at Zuamo's fingers, he asked in puzzlement, "What's wrong with brother's hand?" Zuaemo almost spat blood. He said irritably, "Even the guiding flaming birds need jingsher. Asking for directions is a paid service, understand?" "Oh." Lin Qian made a sound, and then obediently took out a piece of jingsher to hand to Zuaemo. Zuamo's eyes widened, and lightning fast took the jingsher. "Oh, third-grade jingsher." What this guy took out was a piece of third-grade jingsher. Rich person. Fat sheep. Zuaemo instantly labeled Lin Qian, taking out a third-grade jingsher to ask for directions. Only those rich young masters, who don't understand the world, would do such a stupid thing. The thoughts inside his head moved rapidly. Zuamo's voice quickly became very warm. Oh, helping others is the duty of my generation. Brother Lin, don't worry. I'm very familiar with this area. Oh. Lin Qian seemed to understand as he nodded his head, his face showing a relieved expression. Here, walking forward, it's Dong Fu. Zuaemo displayed everything he knew, and then pretended to ask mysteriously, "Does Brother Lin know what place Dong Fu is?" "Don't know." Lin Qian asked with an interested expression. Truly a young master. Zuaemo was both jealous and disdainful. These days, other than those rich young masters, who had the leisure to sightsee everywhere. Slandering inside, his mouth went. "This Dong Fu, it is one of our Sky Moon Jie's primary towns." "There is." Suddenly realizing that this young master probably came from a larger place, and these things wouldn't arouse the other's interest, his direction changed. Speaking of Dong Fu, it was Dong Fu Xianren who cleaved Dong Fu with one sword blow, and used the bottom half of the mountain to build the town. Impressive. Lin Qian praised, his expression focused. He seemed like a useless young master. Zuamo's heart relaxed slightly, and he continued. "If Brother Lin wants to sightsee, there is a few places to go to in Dong Fu. Please, brother, guide me." Zuaemo pieced together what he had heard usually randomly and said, "If for views, the best views are from the Plum Peak in Dongqi Sword Sect. If it's water, Sky Shaking River is a good place. The river is fast and the scene on both sides is very inspiring." He spoke nonsense, but Lin Qian listened extremely carefully. Dong Fu might be a bit out of the way, but there are some strong people. A few days ago I saw a 1,000-wing ship. TSK, really frightening. 1,000-wing ship? Lin Qian suddenly asked. Yes, Qi Yijinren's traveling palace. Since they were going in the same direction, the two traveled together. Earning a piece of third-grade jingsher, Zuaemo was satisfied. This Lin Qian's cultivation wasn't high, just slightly above Zuaemo. Zuaemo wasn't afraid he would do anything. For cultivators, day and night were not very different. Even as the night came, the two didn't stop. Even if he couldn't ruminate on sword scripture, it wasn't boring having someone to talk to. That little bit of ink in Zuamo's stomach was quickly all used up, and it switched to Lin Qian to talk. Only now did Zuaemo find that this young master, that seemed like a fat sheep, was extremely knowledgeable. As he listened, admiration rose. It was the first time he met someone who had such broad knowledge. Around him, if it wasn't those that cultivated the sword, it was being busy with common jobs. He had never seen someone like Lin Qian, that knew something about everything under the sky. It might have been that Lin Qian finally encountered someone that was willing to listen to him. But Lin Qian interestedly talked, and drew Zuaemo in. The two didn't travel slowly, and quickly neared Dong Fu. Zuaxixiang! Zuaxixiang! Zuaemo heard someone yelling at him, and raised his head. He saw a few outer sect disciples. These outer sect disciples also released a breath. Finally found Xixiang. The sect leader was very worried about Xixiang, and especially ordered us to search for Xixiang. Finishing, their expressions became slightly strange. In front of them, Zuaemo and Lin Qian made for a strong comparison. Beside an extremely handsome man, there stood a half-naked skeleton with a sword. This picture, it really was. Zuaemo didn't pay attention to the looks of these outer sect disciples. He turned around, his hand presenting the third-grade jingsher in front of Lin Qian, his voice serious as he said, "Brother Lin's knowledge is deep like the sea." Swaemo admires very much. This Jingshur, this one doesn't dare to accept. This day and night, this little brother has learned much. It's more than enough for acting as a guide. But it's a pity that this little brother has a sect assessment immediately, and has no time to sightsee with Brother Lin. Brother Lin, have a good trip. Finishing, he shoved the third-grade Jingshur into Lin Qian's hand at the side. The outer sect disciples stared with wide eyes dumbly at the third-grade Jingshur. Waving his hand at Lin Qian, Swaemo started running in the direction of Wukong Mountain. The outer sect disciples returned to their bodies and hurriedly followed. Chapter 63 The Sect Assessment Returning to the mountain, Swaemo was called over to Shifeng Rong immediately, and was severely scolded. Swaemo knew that his master was worried for him, and he was very agreeable. Inside his heart felt warm. Master might not have a good temper, her personality might be a bit cold, but she was still not bad for a master. After he was scolded over by master, he returned to the little yard. He had too many things to digest. These few days he needed to relax. After heavy practice the past 3 months, his mind had reached its limits. The few days until the sect assessment were perfect for him to rest. He needed to organize the things he had comprehended. Just as Swaemo was resting in the little west wind yard, a white-clothed male was standing on a mountain peak not far from Wukong Mountain. He muttered, "Should be around here." If Swaemo saw this person, he would be shocked. This white-clothed male, it was the person he met on the road, Lin Qian. Lin Qian's face was solemn. On that peerlessly handsome face, he looked up at the sky, muttering softly, "Stars in daytime." As the sect assessment neared, the entire Wukong sword sect started to become busy. The annual sect assessment was the most important matter for all disciples. It was directly connected to each person's benefits in the upcoming year. The exams were very broad. For example, Swaemo was one of the examiners. He was testing the outer sect disciples on their skill with the 5-element spells. But the most important test of the sect was sword scriptures. The disciples that shone brightly in the assessment, their position and benefits in the sect would improve afterwards. Every disciple, no matter inner or outer sect, had practiced with all their power for the sect assessment. Compared to past years, this year's sect assessment was more interesting. Like the disagreement between Luo Li Shixiang and Swaemo Shixiang. And what everyone really wanted to see was if Wei Sheng Shixiang was going to come out of the sword cave before the sect assessment. If Wei Sheng Shixiang could get out in time, he would definitely attend the assessment. Wei Sheng Shixiang and Swaemo Shixiang had a good relationship, and he certainly wouldn't watch. Then it would be interesting. As to the fight between Luo Li and Swaemo, in the eyes of everyone, it was a fight with a predetermined outcome. The value in its existence was to lure out Wei Sheng Shixiang. Now that it seemed that Wei Sheng Shixiang wasn't going to come, the value of the fight was much smaller. Everyone was guessing how Luo Li Shixiang would humiliate Swaemo. The annual sect assessment of Wukong Sword Sect finally started. All the disciples were gathered at the plaza outside Wukong Hall. Pei Yuan Ran stood at the very front. Looking at the outer sect disciples and inner sect disciples below him, he couldn't help but sigh. This year, it was especially important for Wukong Sword Sect. A Ling plant farmer like Swaemo had appeared, and also a genius sword cultivator like Wei Sheng. Shixiang, let's start. Yin Lu reminded Pei Yuan Ran. For the sect assessment, he had especially rushed back from Dongfu. Pei Yuan Ran came back from his wanderings and nodded his head. Facing everyone else, he slowly opened. This year, the sect has had many outstanding people. I am very comforted. Cultivation is like swimming against the current. If one doesn't progress, it is falling behind. You can't slack off. Yes. The disciples answered synchronously. Start the assessment. The first to undergo the tests were the sect's outer sect disciples. And the ones responsible for testing them were all the inner sect disciples. Swaemo was responsible for Ling farming. Sui was responsible for forging. Like so, everyone was responsible for a certain area. This was the first time that Swaemo saw the eldest Shiji Gongsun Qing. Eldest Shiji's appearance was proper, mature and extremely dignified. She didn't say very much. Most of her words were gentle and tactful, but everyone was still very respectful of her. Supposedly, eldest Shiji was going to marry soon. Her fiancé was a disciple from a large sect. She was the only one of the inner sect disciples that wasn't responsible for an exam. Her duty was to patrol the entire location. From this, it could be seen the trust the sect leader and the other Shirshu had in her. Seeing the familiar faces now filled with awe, Zuemo was reminded of himself. Last year's sect assessment, he was still among them. Now he was their examiner. His heart felt slightly strange. Compared to the other disciples, Zuemo was much more familiar with these outer sect disciples. He was clear to each one's cultivation. As a result, he was very efficient. He was the first inner sect disciple to finish his examination. Carefully sealing the results in a jade scroll, he then handed it to the sect leader. Oh, Little Mo's speed is very quick. The sect leader smiled at Zuemo as he took the jade scroll. This disciple is very familiar with all the shitty, so it was a bit faster. Zuemo carefully answered. And not bad. The sect leader scanned the results, and then nodded in confirmation. He turned and gave the jade stick to Yen Lu, who was at the side, and smiled at Zuemo. Little Mo, I heard you were swept away by the river when you were practicing. If Zuemo didn't have a zombie face, he would certainly have been very red at the moment. Being asked by the sect leader in front of the Shirshu, even though Zuemo's skin was thick, he still found it hard to deal with. This disciple wasn't attentive, and will be careful next time. Zuemo could only answer. N. Pay attention, otherwise your master will worry. The sect leader said. Have a clean death. Shifeng Rong coldly took over. Zuemo knew what kind of temper his master had and wasn't concerned. After that, the other exams were also completed. The sealed jade sticks handed over to the sect leader. Here the sect assessment was put on hold. All the disciples were quietly waiting for the sect leader to announce the rewards. The first 3 of each year's sect assessment would always get prizes. The sect leader scanned all the jade scrolls before raising his head. Not bad. Everyone improved this year. I'm very comforted. The sect leader's voice wasn't loud, but could be heard across the plaza. The person that improved the most this year really surprised me. Yu Xiaogua. As the sect leader announced it, the female disciples of the Eastern Peak cheered. Zuemo was surprised. He hadn't thought that Xiaogua would make such big improvement. His eyes found Xiaogua in the crowd. Xiaogua didn't seem to have thought that she would be first in the sect assessment this year. Her face instantly turned red like an apple, her head almost touching her chest. The female disciples surrounding her were very excited. A happy expression also came onto Li Yingfeng's face. She had always liked Xiaogua. Xiaogua suddenly raised her flushed face, her eyes searching among the inner sect disciples on the stage. When she saw Li Yingfeng smiling at her, the smile on her own face became even brighter. When her gaze swept towards Zuemo, and saw Zuemo Shixiang give her a thumbs up, her nose suddenly went sour, her eyes misty. At this crucial time, she actually started to cry. Zuemo's thumbs up was paralyzed. He hadn't thought that his action would make Xiaogua cry. This little girl, she really was a headache. Zuemo muttered inside. Second place was Guolu. After he had recovered, he had rapidly improved. The third place was a disciple that Zuemo had never heard of before. He was called Jupeng. These 3 people were going to receive a heavy reward from the sect. Some were disappointed, some were happy. All the possible expressions of people could be seen. For the outer sect disciples, the annual sect assessment had passed. No matter the outcome, it was like a load off their chests. Thinking of the inner sect disciple assessment that was next, they instantly became excited. Each year's inner sect disciple assessment was always spectacular. There were the fights between the Shixiang and the explanations from the sect's Shirshu. Usually, this was something they couldn't see or hear. If they could digest even a bit, it was more than enough for them to benefit. And this year, they had something else to look forward to. How would Luo Li Shixiang torment Zuemo? The outer sect disciples instinctively stepped back, emptying out the plaza for the inner sect disciple battle, and waited for the fireworks. Alright, usual rules. The sect leader didn't waste words. Start. Luo Li was the first to stand out. Entering the sect, he faced Zuemo and said coldly, Zuemo Shitty should have prepared already. As expected, what was supposed to come did come. Zuemo wasn't timid. He stood up and entered the plaza, his mouth not showing weakness. Xixiang is still as chatty as usual. The people below instantly started to murmur. Zuemo and Luo Li's power completely were on different levels. Yet Zuemo was still so arrogant. Wasn't he just asking for Luo Li Xixiang to humiliate him? Luo Li's face instantly turned green. Having been taunted by Zuemo in front of this many people, he laughed angrily. I hope that shitty sword is half as sharp as your words. Xixiang will know if he tries. Zuemo found that he wasn't nervous at all. Humph, Luo Li said. You first. Zuemo was eager for Luo Li to underestimate him. It fit his desire that the other let him attack first. Without hesitation, the ice crystal sword disappeared in front of him, leaving behind a clear ripple. Flowing water. The crux of this move was for the sword to act as though it was falling like water from a high altitude. The water essence was smooth without a hint of presence. It seems that Shitty has worked hard recently. Luo Li smirked. Since he was planning to humiliate Zuemo, naturally, he wouldn't let this battle end so quickly. He wanted Zuemo to understand just how great the gap was between them. He wanted Zuemo to realize that the two wasn't on the same level. That he could kill Zuemo as easily as killing an ant. Ding! The sound of impact was as clear as glass. 10 steps in front of Luo Li, invisible vibrations spread out. Luo Li acted as though no one was present as he started to walk towards Zuemo, his face smiling coldly. What? Does Shitty only have these little moves? Zuemo's entire mind was on controlling the ice crystal sword, and didn't hear the words. The sword suddenly changed as though it became countless little flows, wrapping around in layers as dense as cloth. The little flows spun quicker and quick, producing soft hissing sounds. Just 2 steps from Luo Li, these revolving small flows multiplied in size and started to ring. 7 whirlpools suddenly appeared around Luo Li. The sword was soft yet sticky, the 7 whirlpools trapping Luo Li in the middle like a cage made out of whirlpools. Luo Li had no place to escape. Each whirlpool was made up of countless tiny sword energies. These hair-thin, weak-looking sword energies were full of a silent danger. Li Water Sword Scripture. 7 whirlpools. Chapter 64. Caught it. 7 whirlpools. The outer sect disciples simultaneously sighed in shock. Those that had been spectating instantly became alert. Zuemo Xixiang really had concealed himself deeply. Yen Lu was slightly surprised as he looked at the plaza. Little Mo has something like this? He had just returned and didn't know what had happened with Zuemo. Seeing Zuemo releasing such an exquisite attack, he was very shocked. Pei Yuan Ran said, "Don't rush. There might be even bigger surprises later." The situation suddenly changed. Zuemo, who had been thought as destined to lose, suddenly revealed a very strong sword move, and also raised everyone's interest. Trapped between 7 sword energy whirlpools, Luo Li's face was still indifferent. He didn't seem to make a motion, but the 7 roaring sword energy whirlpools suddenly paused, the strands of sword energy flailing chaotically, but not one sword energy could enter the area 5 paces from Luo Li. Luo Li didn't slack off either. Pei Yuan Ran had a satisfied expression. Turning, he asked Xian Yan, "This move extinguish, what level?" "The 5th, Xian Yan said. Luo Li's talent isn't bad, but it's a pity he met Wei Sheng." Yinlu said aimlessly. The others all had a slightly discomfort expression. Wei Sheng's talents was much greater than Luo Li. Based on the perspective of the sect, the unequal treatment was natural. But the time that Luo Li spent with them was much longer than Wei Sheng, and much closer in terms of feelings. Pei Yuan Ran said, "This isn't something that can be dealt with. We as Sword Xiao uphold the rule of the strong and weak. Ambition is good, but what is needed is to understand one's own abilities." Qingqing asked for shapeless sword scripture from me. Xian Yin said, "Must be for Luo Li." Yen Lu was extremely intelligent and said with a smile, "Shapeless sword scripture and empty sword scripture come from the same origin. Qingqing's conduct, it's very interesting." Shifeng Rong's brows furrowed as she said, "Isn't that making the situation worse?" Pei Yuan Ran said, Shimmy, don't worry. Competition is a good thing. They are still very young. We can look over them and slowly polish away. Maybe one or two of them will become accomplished, and we will not fail our masters. Hearing this, the other three nodded their heads in agreement. The fight between Zuemo and Luo Li intensified. Luo Li was very shocked inside. 3 months to reach this level of skill. His talent wasn't weaker than his own. Thinking about it, his heart felt like it was bursting, as though a fire had been lit. In the last decade, he was the most favored, most talented disciple in Wukong sword sect. And this move layered tide was continuous, becoming stronger as it continued. The layers of sword energy were like waves, layers of little waves merging together. The curtain made of swords, which had been like a drizzle of rain, suddenly became fierce and turbulent. Luo Li seemed to be right next to the water, the giant turbulence about to swallow him. Shocked gasps came from the surroundings. The past 2 moves might have surprised people, but it wasn't as intimidating as layered tide. In their eyes, a giant wave came down from the sky, unable to be dodged. Those outer sect disciples at odds with Zuemo paled in fright, their legs weak. This giant wave wasn't water, but composed of layers of countless sword energies. Once one was swallowed, then they should wait to be cut up into pieces. It seemed that he had truly understood this sword scripture. Luo Li's eyes became even darker. Staring at the sword curtain as it came down, killing intent flashed through his eyes. He decided to give the zombie a blow that would completely destroy the other's confidence. He faced the sword curtain full of danger and turbulence and stepped forward. Another step. A third step. Break! The voice rang out over the entire plaza. Everyone felt their chests compress, and then shock came onto their faces. Hiss! Like a small knife cutting cloth, not dissonant but a clear sound. The giant sword energy wave was cut in half. Seeing the sword curtain forcefully broken in 2, Zuemo jumped in fright. Just as he was about to change moves, he suddenly detected a hint of danger. His heart alarmed. He didn't have time to think as his body fell down to the left. Even though he hadn't seen anything, but Zuemo could clearly feel something brushed tightly next to him. He was like a frightened cat, all the hair on his body standing up. Zuemo, having dropped to the floor, couldn't care about the pain on his body, and scrambled to distance himself from Luo Li. Oh my heart almost jumped out. It seems that Zuemo Shixiang isn't weak. Pity that he encountered Luo Li Shixiang. One of the surrounding disciples couldn't help stating, That's right. Look at Luo Li Shixiang. That's the composure of a strong person. That stride, that expression. Zuemo Shixiang is still a bit weak. Someone else in the surrounding followed. Yes. If Wei Xing Shixiang could come out, then it might be enough. Haha, don't be impatient. In any case, the battle between the two will happen. Really? Think about it. Can one mountain have 2 tigers? Zuemo couldn't hear any sound. He could only hear the beat of his heart. He furiously panted, his chest a heaving bellows. He stared with wide eyes at Luo Li, his mouth dry. So risky. Just that little bit. Just now, Zuemo's brain had even turned white for a second. This was the first time he had met such danger. The zombie face was full of dust. His entire body was muddy and formed a sorry figure. His actions were that of a true greenhorn, emphasizing Luo Li's strong composure. After a long while, Zuemo gradually recovered his calm. Luo Li wasn't far away, smirking as he looked at him. Luo Li suddenly found that this way was very good. His intention had been to embarrass Zuemo. In front of the sect leader, he naturally couldn't injure Zuemo. So let him completely humiliate Zuemo. The gap between you and I, it's much larger than you think. Having made a decision, Luo Li smiled coldly as he looked at Zuemo. He wasn't in a rush to attack. It was like a cat playing catch with a mouse. Hao Min's face was smug. If it wasn't that the elders were at the side, she would have definitely been laughing. Hatred flashed across her eyes. Dare to fight with this lady, you scum. Today, you'll play until you die. Luo Li casually walked forward. Zuemo unconsciously shrunk back. That action, it was very similar to a startled bird. Laughter roared through the surroundings. On the stage, Shifeng Rong's face was black. Zuomo's eyes widened as he stared unblinkingly at Luo Li. He didn't hear the laughter from the surroundings. No one knew the feelings under that zombie face of his. Just like no one knew what he was thinking. The strong terror actually made him even more focused. Shitty isn't attacking? Luo Li's voice was full of mockery as it spread. It was like a cat teasing a mouse. The scattered laughter made Luo Li feel smug. He even had the leisure to look at Hao Min. Hao Min saw Luo Li look at her, and instantly sent a flirtatious look back. Luo Li was greatly encouraged, and resolved to torment this distasteful little zombie today. Zuomo didn't speak. His eyes were wide as they stared at Luo Li. Just having tasted the power of empty sword scripture, he didn't dare to slip up. Since Shitty isn't attacking, then I won't be courteous. Luo Li smiled at Hao Min and drawled. Zuomo's pupils suddenly shrunk. Like a grasshopper, he suddenly leapt towards the right. Hiss! Zuomo felt his left arm become cold. A piece of fabric flew into the sky. A cold and intimidating sword energy passed right next to his skin. Ping! Zuomo had leapt with too much power, and hit the granite stone ground. He instantly bared his teeth in pain. Not having the time to care about the pain, he rolled and climbed up. His hair was loose, his clothing disheveled, a large hole at his shoulder. Where are Shitty sword moves? Luo Li's cold voice had a hint of mockery. Hiss! Zuomo didn't have time to think and jumped sideways again. At the same time, the right-hand sleeve floated into the sky. Ping pain. Climbing up, he stared at Luo Li. The laughter from the surroundings, he didn't hear it. Luo Li didn't give Zuomo any time to rest. The sword energies coming one after the other. Piece by piece, cloth flew into the sky. Zuomo's clothing almost became strips of cloth. His entire body was covered in dust and dirt. Some parts of the skin were bleeding. He was like a beggar. No one was laughing anymore. The entire plaza was unusually silent. Many outer sect disciples didn't want to look. Xiaoguo bit her lips, unaware that her tears had fallen down. Li Yingfeng's eyes were about to spit fire. Half crouching on the ground, Zuomo panted heavily. His wide eyes were staring fixedly at Luo Li. His ears still didn't hear any sound. He was breathing fast, his throat dry and burning. He didn't notice it, just like no one noticed excitement flash, and then hide in his eyes. Caught it. Chapter 65, Li Water Burning Heavens, should we call for an end? Yen Le said with slight dissatisfaction. His brows furrowed as he looked at the sorry figure of Zuomo in the plaza. Before, he had felt that even though Luo Li had been somewhat arrogant, but overall, he had been very good. Today's battle had changed his impression of Luo Li to an extremely terrible one. He might not be as strong as Xian Yen, but he was still a Jindan Xiuzha. How could he not see? Luo Li clearly had the advantage, but like a cat catching a mouse, he was playing with the other. The two were still disciples of the same sect, regardless of how serious the conflict. What was happening now was somewhat over the top. Inside, he blamed Zuomo for trying to be brave. He had clearly given Zuomo a Ling armor, but Zuomo didn't wear it. What he didn't know was that when Zuomo had been practicing in the river, he naturally had taken the armor off. After he returned, he forgot to put it on. Glancing at the dark face of Shifeng Rong, Pei Yuanran smiled. No rush, no rush. Then he said in a heavy tone. In the future, the rules need to be adjusted. Of course. Yen Lu agreed. In the past, the feelings between the disciples have been pretty good, and nothing like this had happened. Right now, the situation in the sect is complicated. It's better to change the rules. In the battlefield, Zuomo panted heavily. He blocked off all the outside noise. He stared fixedly at Luo Li only 10 steps away from him. He caught it. Caught the barely perceptible ripple. Empty sword scripture. Was like traveling through the void, and that made it hard to detect the sword. However, to humiliate Zuomo, Luo Li had purposefully let out a small flaw to give Zuomo time to dodge. He definitely wouldn't have thought that this flaw that he purposefully left behind let Zuomo find an unique characteristic of empty sword scripture. It had to be said that empty sword scripture deserved to be the finest among the third-grade sword scriptures. Up until now, Zuomo hadn't found Luo Li's flying sword. This was the speciality of empty sword scripture. The flying sword could travel through space and pierce through it to wound others, giving others the feeling that it was non-existent. However, Luoli was far from the level of his sword essence becoming non-existent. It was an extremely small ripple. Just before the flying sword would appear, there would be a very small Ling energy ripple. This Ling energy ripple, in the midst of the unsteady surroundings, could be easily overlooked. However, as Luoli repeatedly played, Zuomo, who had been highly alert, caught this sign. Zuomo's cultivation was far from Luoli, but his spiritual power was far above Luoli. This was also the reason he could catch this small fluctuation. As long as he could catch the fluctuation, empty sword, it wasn't untraceable any longer. On a zombie face smeared with dirt and sweat, it seemed that there were two deep red flames jumping deep in his eyes. The smugness on Luoli's face gradually disappeared. Previously, every time he made a blow, Zuomo's sorry state caused a lot of laughter. But afterwards the laughter decreased in number. Presently, the entire plaza was dead silent. No matter how disheveled a figure Zuomo was, there wasn't any more noise. This made Luoli feel very uncomfortable. He decided to end this boring battle, using the move he had just comprehended. The mockery on his face disappeared. His expression turned grave. All the Ling energy in his body moved. The air seemed to have solidified, silent and deadly. The disciples that were spectating felt a heavy pressure form, as though it was tangible, and their expressions all changed. They could not dodge it. Luoli Shixiang, had he reached this kind of level? Even those inner sect disciples couldn't help but show shock on their faces. Luoli Shixiang's cultivation was stronger than them, but they had not thought that Luoli Shixiang would be this strong. Light flashed through Yin Li's eyes. The others also looked down with solemn expressions. Shitty, pay attention and get ready to interfere, Pei Yuanran said firmly to Xianyan. His eyes were tightly locked on Luoli, seemingly excited. With his experience, how could he not see that this was a move that combined empty sword scripture and shapeless sword scripture? Empty sword scripture and shapeless sword scripture were born from the same root. In the past, void sword scripture was broken into two sword scriptures, empty sword scripture and shapeless sword scripture. All these years, many people had wanted to put the two sword scriptures back together, but no one had succeeded. In the past, if Xianyan hadn't cultivated Ice Dragon Sword Scripture, he would have certainly done this. Basically, any disciple of the sect that practiced one of the two sword scriptures would try their best to combine the two sword scriptures. So when they saw Luoli's move, Pei Yuanran and the other three were instantly absorbed. No one knew how to learn void sword scripture, but there were many records about this sword scripture. All the records would always have one word: essence moves and rises. With Luoli's cultivation, he wouldn't be able to exude this kind of presence unless he comprehended sword essence. Yet, in the eyes of experts like Xianyan, whether Luoli had comprehended sword essence or not could be seen with a glance. Then there was only one possibility: combining the sword scriptures. How could they not be excited? Zuomo didn't know any of this. In his eyes there was only Luoli, only that ripple. Luoli's presence was extremely shocking, but in Zuomo's eyes, it was far less frightening than before. The fluctuation was too strong. He almost didn't need to try to locate the relative position of this Ling energy fluctuation. It was clearer than any previous time. The previous sword moves might not have been as strong in terms of presence, but that fluctuation was extremely small. If it wasn't that Zuomo's consciousness was strong, he wouldn't have been able to detect it. Laboriously waiting for a chance, Zuomo's pupils shrunk, and the ice crystal sword that had been floating landed in his hand. Stepping forward in a half-crouch, his body slightly bent, the sword tip pointing to the ground, the eyes half closed. All the fire, all the desire for battle, all the resolve, all of it started to retreat inside. Zuomo was like a dirty stone statue, motionless. Luoli saw Zuomo's posture, and a faint icy smile floated on the corner of his mouth. In front of absolute power, any kind of rebellion was useless. He wanted the sect leader and the others to see his potential, see that he was more exceptional than Wei Sheng. He needed to take back what belonged to him. He didn't notice that at this time, Xian Yin Shirshu's attention moved from his body to Zuomo's body. Xian Yan's usually stone-cold face was in a rare state of surprise. Luoli didn't notice. If he had noticed, maybe he would think of what was behind it. He raised his right hand, his fingers forming a sword, the Ling energy revolving. Some meticulous outer sect disciples instantly noticed that a layer of faint white mist had formed and surrounded Zuomo's lowered ice crystal sword. It looked like Zuomo was holding a ball of mist. Luoli felt that the time was right. Without hesitation he attacked, his fingers lightly swiping at Zuomo. All the accumulated anger, it seemed to have found a place to vent and furiously flooded following Luoli's fingers. Just at this moment, Zuomo suddenly opened his eyes. It was like a dead motionless statue had suddenly come alive. Zuomo's clear bright eyes were entirely red like bloody eyes, but also like a roaring fire, burning like his desire to fight and his resolve. The moment he opened his eyes, all the energy that had retreated suddenly exploded. Using all the power in his body, he swung the sword against the current viciously upwards. Li! The raspy voice was explosive, like a fireball suddenly exploding. Biding his time for so long, it was all for this move. All the Ling energy, all the spiritual energy, Zuomo didn't keep any of it back. All of it was poured into this, Li water-burning heavens. His eyes glared furiously almost as though they were going to pop out. That zombie face that was eternally expressionless was twisted like a dancing flame. Luoli's expression changed. What was that? He clearly saw countless jumping flames, countless flames filled with explosiveness, but why? They clearly were just water. Impossible. That was impossible. That damn zombie had clearly been using a water element sword scripture. How could it transform into fire? It had to be said that Li Water Sword Scripture was a very unique sword scripture. The uniqueness wasn't just found in manipulating water like fire. Even its sword moves were very unique. In the 7 moves, the first 6 moves, they were all classical water element sword moves. They walked the path of water. Anyone who encountered it would naturally classify it as a classical water element sword scripture, but only up till the very last move. That one took a huge curve. Manipulate water like fire. Without having learned the last move, Li Water Burning Heavens, it wasn't possible to really comprehend Li Water Sword Scripture. All the essence of Li Water Sword Scripture was in this final move. Even the people who practiced it had a hard time finding it, to say nothing of the people facing it. Additionally, while the sword moves that Zuomo had previously used were skilled and smooth, but in each move, not one bit of sword essence was revealed. Zuomo had thought it through. Sword essence was the only place that he could win. If the other was alert against it, he didn't even have the tiniest bit of hope. So in the beginning, no matter if it was flowing water, 7 whirlpools or layered tides, he didn't use sword essence. Only now, in front of Zuomo, a crack suddenly appeared. It gave off a terrifying presence like an ancient monster that would eat people. Joy made its way onto the faces of Pei Yuan Ran and the others. Only Xian Yan's gaze was tightly locked on Zuomo. What was going to come out of the crack? The flying sword. Zuomo seemed to be combusting. His eyes were blood red and he roared, not dodging in the slightest. The ice crystal sword, swung with all his power, went up against the flow as a layer of strange and clear water flames appeared. All the disciples, no matter inner sect or outer, no one could keep their composure. Even the steady Qin Cheng's expression changed dramatically. Sword essence. That was sword essence. In their eyes, Zuomo was like a ball of fire, a strange and clear water flame. Presence. A vicious and brutal presence suddenly spread out with Zuomo as the center. Luoli finally was shocked. Not caring about anything else. All the Ling energy in his body started to revolve. The ice crystal sword suddenly lightened. The strange water flame left the sword, transforming into a silently burning fire. Sword formed out of water, accurately hitting that crack. Everyone could only see a patch of white and nothing else. Their ears rang, they couldn't hear anything. The disciples that had been closer felt that someone had pushed them heavily, forcing them to move 6 or 7 steps behind, before they could steady themselves. Only a long while later did everyone's eyes recovered. When they looked at the battlefield, everyone truly was dumbstruck. There was a gigantic and deep hole in the plaza. Inside the plaza, Zhuemo's upper half was naked, his clothing having disappeared. He was still locked in his position of swinging the sword. The light in his eyes retreated. He was like a statue. At the edge of the deep pit, blood seeped out of the corner of Luo Li Shixiang's mouth. His hair was a mess. Not much of his clothing had remained. His eyes were fixed on Zhuemo Fu. Luo Li Shixiang suddenly spat out blood and fell down backwards. At the same time, Zhuemo still maintained his attack position as he silently dropped to the ground. Waking up from the meditation, Zhuemo felt his mind was completely refreshed and unspeakably comfortable. Thinking about the Ling food he had just eaten, he couldn't help but sigh at the effect of the meal, which was even more effective than meditating for 4 hours in the stone room. But the Ling vein in the stone room was completely free, and while there hadn't been that much food, the price of the Ling food definitely wasn't cheap. If it wasn't a reward from the sect, he certainly couldn't afford it. Pushing open the door, he walked outside the room. It was a small yard outside the door. At this time, Zhuemo knew where he was. This place was a small out-of-the-way yard and fragrant ginger yard. He would pass by this place every day. It seemed familiar upon further observation. He decided to go see his master. Walking out of the little yard, he saw quite a few female outer sect disciples along his way. Zhuemo instantly felt the completely different change in their attitude. Previously, they had been respectful of him. Now there was a hint of awe in this respect. This awe that came from the heart. It caused their spines to bend more, their attitude more careful and respectful. Zhuemo wasn't used to it. Su Qing saw Zhuemo and hurried to bow Shixiang. Master is waiting for. Even Su Qing was using the formal you. Zhuemo felt very uncomfortable. He shook his head and said, "It's not good that Shimi calls me this, it's too formal." Shixiang is right, Su Qing was wrong. Su Qing smiled warmly. Previously, she had helped Zhuemo, but she didn't think he would end up doing so well. Who could have known that Zhuemo could fight to a standstill with Luo Li Shixiang? When she had seen it, she was dumbstruck. Even now she still felt disbelief. This incident caused the entire fragrant ginger yard to take a new look at this zombie Shixiang. Su Qing was smart and knew that this fight had completely decided Shixiang's position in Fragrant Ginger Yard and the sect. Before, Haomin Shiji had been arrogant and despotic in Fragrant Ginger Yard. In the future, she would definitely be more restrained. If she still didn't control herself, then she would be too stupid. Zhuemo Shixiang might look slow, but no matter if it was cunning, power, or talent, he surpassed Haomin. Su Qing knew of the battle between the inner sect disciples. As an outer sect disciple, she naturally felt closer to Wei Sheng and Zhuemo, who had once been outer sect disciples as well. However, Su Qing was still careful and aware of herself. Many people, when they prospered, their temper and personality became drastically different. Prudence would never be a mistake. However, Zhuemo Shixiang's personality seemed much better than she had imagined. Zhuemo's zombie face still was expressionless. He nodded at Su Qing, and then walked towards Master's Dan room. Pushing open the door to enter, he saw Master Shifeng Rong. "Now you know to act brave." When Shifeng Rong saw him, she discourteously started scolding. "Just admit defeat earlier next time. Did you have to injure yourself like that?" She completely forgot she had sent a death order for Zhuemo to not lose. Zhuemo perceptively didn't mention it, and muttered in compliance. To argue with this person, he didn't have the guts. Shifeng Rong's tone relaxed. "But you didn't lose face for me. Very good." Zhuemo heard this and rolled his eyes inside. "This is probably what you really thought inside." Shifeng Rong was very satisfied with this disciple. Even though he had only been a Ling plant farmer, but she had been shocked at his talent at Dan making. He could make the golden crow pill, even when he just started to learn Dan making. The first time Zhuemo made the golden crow pill, it could be explained by luck. Afterwards, when he found the basic method, she hadn't said anything, but she had been very shocked inside. This wasn't something that could be accomplished by luck. Seeing his exceptional talent, Shifeng Rong had made even stricter demands of him. She didn't have any hope for the fight between Swordsmanship and Luoli. Regardless that she had ordered that he could not lose, she was clear that the two weren't on the same power level. Yet Swordsmanship once again gave her a surprise. Even though he didn't win, but he truly didn't lose. In a short 3 months, he was able to comprehend sword essence. This kind of sword talent, even the cold second Shixiang was surprised. The sect leader and third Shixiang had gaped. She had been very smug inside. 3 months, and you were able to comprehend sword essence. Your talent at the sword isn't weak. If it was buried, it would be a pity. Shifeng Rong slowly said. In the future, you can go to your second Sherbua to learn about the sword. I'm telling you, if you go to your second Sherbua, don't dishonor me. If I learn that you are slacking, humph. The snort was very cold. Swordsmanship silently grimaced. To go to second Sherbua's place to learn the sword, this treatment, it was extremely high in Wukong sword sect. It was something that every disciple dreamed about. If it was in the past, Swordsmanship would have nodded and agreed, but now, he thought that there was still an idle and steady Pu Yao in his consciousness, and then thought about second Sherbua's sword-like gaze. Swordsmanship felt he had dropped into ice. He still remembered the snow-white sword essence of second Sherbua, slicing through the black sea the night he met Pu Yao for the first time. Even the kind of strong Yaoma that was Pu Yao, he still wasn't second Sherbua's opponent. If second Sherbua found Pu Yao in his consciousness, his own ending would be of the utmost miserable. What was a reward in other people's eyes? Swordsmanship wanted to avoid it. This disciple just wants to learn dam making from master. Before Swordsmanship could finish, Shifeng Rong interrupted. Dan making is Dan making. Cultivating the sword is cultivating the sword. No one said that making Dan means not being able to cultivate the sword. Stop talking and go where I tell you. But, Shifeng Rong looked suspiciously at Swordsmanship. You have a question? Being pierced with master's gaze, Swordsmanship's heart jumped rapidly. Don't let master see anything fishy. He hurriedly shook his head. No. If you don't have any, then go. Shifeng Rong impatiently waved her hand to rush Swordsmanship out. Coming out of master's Dan room, Swordsmanship felt very uncertain. Of the 4 elders, the one he was most afraid of meeting was Xian Yin Sherbua. Whenever Xian Yin Sherbua looked at him, Swordsmanship felt that the other could see him clearly, and that all secrets were revealed in second Sherbua's eyes. But this obstacle could not be avoided. Swordsmanship cautiously went to second Sherbua's residence. Second Sherbua was skilled in 2 areas. One was cultivating the sword. The other was forging. Wei Xing Shixiang had personally been taught by him. Luo Li had once received his teachings. Other than that, Sui Shixiang was the only disciple of second Sherbua, and learned forging from him. Swordsmanship could only walk towards second Sherbua's residence. Second Sherbua resided alone at Sun Lookout Peak. This was a place that Swordsmanship had never stepped in before. Following the winding mountain road, Swordsmanship was extremely careful and furtive. When he reached the peak of Sun Lookout Peak, he was shocked still. The peak was very large, but there was only a small grass hut. Other than that, no other living thing was on the ground. Swordsmanship was about 150 steps from the grass hut. These 150 steps, he walked with his heart beating fast. A few times he almost turned and ran away. Under his feet, not 1 foot of ground was whole. Actually, not just under his feet, but the entire top of Sun Lookout Peak. There wasn't a whole piece of ground. There were intersecting cracks. The ground of Sun Lookout Peak seemed to have been heavily plowed countless times. When he stepped on the upturned soil, Swordsmanship's heart shrunk. Sword essence. The broken soil on the upturned ground under his feet contained extremely strong sword essence. They followed out as though they wanted to cut off Swordsmanship's legs, or as though they wanted to burrow inside his body from the soles of his feet. The cold killing intent made Swordsmanship's hair stand on end. He unconsciously swallowed, controlling his impulse to take out the ice crystal sword, and gritted his teeth as he walked forward. 1 step, 1 step. It was like his feet were stepping on countless sword tips. Each step was extremely careful. Swordsmanship felt the impulse countless times to take out ice crystal sword. It was an instinctive response, but each time he would stop it. This patch of broken ground concealed countless sword essences. If he really summoned the ice crystal sword, that was really poking the hornet's nest. Those hidden sword essences would swarm and rip him to shreds. Damn it! This ghastly place. Formal way of saying you. The pinyin is nin as opposed to the informal you and I. Chapter 67. Questions and Answers. Swaemo was like a tense string as he carefully moved in front of the door to the grass hut. Just the slightest bit of outside force and he would move. He took a deep breath. Even though he had broken through to the second breath of embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, and didn't need to use his nose and mouth to breathe, but when he was nervous, he still unconsciously followed the familiar pattern of breathing to calm his emotions. Letting his mind settle, he gave a deep bow to the wooden door of the grass hut. Disciple Swaemo greets Sherbwa. Come in. Exanyin Sherbwa's icy voice came out of the grass hut. The wooden door opened silently. The inside of the hut was a patch of darkness. Swaemo's heart couldn't help but tense up once again. He gathered his courage and walked in. The interior of the grass hut was extremely crude. There was only a meditation mat. Other than that, there was nothing else. Exanyin Sherbwa was sitting on the meditation mat. A small stream of sunlight entering the grass hut and falling onto Exanyin Sherbwa's body. Sherbwa's body was under the sun, but his face was shadowed by the hair in front of his forehead and couldn't be seen clearly until he opened his eyes. In the shadow, 2 dots of ice suddenly lit up. For some unknown reason, Swaemo felt a bone-aching cold flow from the tail of spine upwards. All the muscles in his body paralyzed. You are a surprise to me. Exayanyan's voice was like a cold mist, permeating through Swaemo's skin into his heart. So cold that he almost couldn't move. You don't have any talent at the sword. Exayanyan said calmly. Swaemo's heart suddenly tensed. He felt that he almost forgot to breathe at this instant. Terror, like the flood overcoming the dam, instantly broke through Swaemo's psychological defenses. Did Sherbwa find out? You could comprehend sword essence in 3 months, that surprised me. Exayanyan didn't look at Swaemo. He slowly closed his eyes, the 2 dots of ice disappearing into the shadows. I'm not concerned with what fortuitous encounters you had, but you have to remember, if you do anything against the sect in the future, I will kill you with my sword. The tone was calm, as though it was narrating a simple matter. It was like Swaemo suddenly rose from hell into heaven. This joyful surprise stunned him for a moment. He had already prepared to stretch out his neck to be killed. He had assumed that second Sherbwa had already seen through him, and seen that Pu Yao was in his consciousness. The tense muscles on his body instantly relaxed. Swaemo felt his body was weak, the lingering fears in his heart like a flood, almost swallowing him. His feet were sore and weak. Yes, Swaemo hurriedly answered, his mind slightly steadier. Just having escaped death. Swaemo's mood was very good, and he waved his hand in greeting to the female bird. Gong Sunqing saw Swaemo's youthful actions and couldn't help but grin. Sui Xia only took a glance. Seeing it was only just a normal gray-beaked goose, she looked away with a hint of disdain in her eyes. Her steed was a third-grade golden fire pupil beast, extremely intimidating and dominant. In her eyes, a gray-beaked goose was for country bumpkins only. The group of 4 sat down. Swaemo made a pot of tea. The 3 touched it with their lips before setting it down. Swaemo didn't care. What he had was just normal tea. It was a bit cheap. Normally, even he didn't drink it. It really shocked me that Shitty comprehended sword essence in 3 months. Shitty is really too mean to not have slipped any hint, and make me worry. Sui said with a smile. Swaemo quickly answered. It isn't that this little brother deliberately concealed it. Even this little brother hadn't thought it would be possible. Afraid of saying it and being embarrassed. This little brother had been practicing in the river, and had been swept a few 100 miles away by the water. Even the sect leader had to send someone to search. The other 3 people's expressions instantly became slightly strange. They had already used the incident of Swaemo being swept away by the river as a joke. The 3 had mocked or disdained it. Now that Swaemo mentioned it in self-mockery, the 3 instantly didn't feel good inside. Swaemo had comprehended sword essence, and was walking far in front of them. Previously mocking Swaemo, it clearly showed their ignorance and stupidity. What sword scripture is Shidi practicing? Su Yixia asked with a face of innocence. Li water sword scripture. Zhuemo didn't deny it. If they wanted to know, they naturally could find out. It is a 3rd grade 5 elements sword scripture. Pity that Sherbwa said that it would be difficult for it to progress more. Hearing this, Su Yixia's cunning eyes couldn't help but reveal delight. Zhuemo coincidentally caught it. He couldn't resist sneering inside. This brat definitely didn't have a good heart. Shidi, don't be discouraged. Gong Sunqing comforted. Your talents are so outstanding. Sherbwa and sect leader wouldn't waste your talents. Shiji is right. Feeling the concern of the other, Zhuemo felt goodwill for her, and bowed towards Gong Sunqing. It might have been that she would be marrying soon, but she didn't walk closely with Qin Cheng's group. It seemed like that she didn't want to involve herself in the battle between the two sides. This time, it is me that is searching for Shidi. The eldest Shiji smiled, her tone gentle. These two have been taken along to keep me company. I heard that Shidi can make a kind of lingdan called Golden Crow Pill, which has a probability of making Golden Crow fire. Is that true? The appraisal says so. In reality, this little brother has not tried. Zhuemo said cautiously. That's good. Gong Sunqing smiled, and took out a jade box. I want to use this time to exchange with Shidi for 100 Golden Crow pills. Shidi, take a look. Finishing, her slender fingers pushed the jade box in front of Zhuemo. Zhuemo was slightly puzzled as he opened the jade box. The moment he opened the jade box, his pupils suddenly expanded. Glee was unable to be disguised in his eyes. Chapter 68. A rare leisure. There was a pale blue 3rd grade water grass lying in the jade box. Light flickered across the plant, and it exuded a faint coldness. Icy cloud grass. It was a very rare water element ling grass. Its shadow could be found in many kinds of high-level Dan recipes. To say nothing else, Zhuemo knew that even Master didn't have ice cloud grass in her fields. Ice cloud grass grew in the coldest of climates. It wasn't easily grown, and was hard to find. It probably wasn't possible to buy such a high-quality ice cloud grass in Dongfu, and showed just how valuable it was. This is too valuable. Zhuemo strongly controlled the greed in his heart, and pushed the jade box back in front of the eldest Shiji. A flicker of admiration ran through Gong Sunqing's eyes. She once again pushed the jade box to Zhuemo. Don't refuse, Shidi. This ice cloud grass, it leans towards the cold and the water element. The dan that can be made from this would certainly be ling dan of the ice and water elements. In this sect, other than Shidi, no one is appropriate for this. Zhuemo thought and then said, 200. The other 100 would be a token of Shidi's goodwill. Gong Sunqing didn't refuse and smiled broadly. Many thanks, Shidi. Everyone talked for a bit longer, but their interests didn't match. Zhuemo felt especially negative towards Su Yixia. The three stood up and left. Zhuemo walked with them to the mouth of the valley. Before leaving, Sui couldn't resist reminding Zhuemo of the Golden Crow pills he had already ordered. Zhuemo nodded. Zhuemo could finally take a breath. Returning to his little yard, he didn't want to do anything. Today's ups and downs, it was enough to tire him out. But he still moved the ice cloud grass into the Ling spring of the rock room first. That Ling spring was near the Ling vein, and the Ling energy was extremely thick, and suited for the growth of the ice cloud grass. The reason he had been so happy seeing the ice cloud grass wasn't completely due to its value, but because the Jade Scrolls of Elder Wei Nan recorded a kind of water method to make a Ling Dan. Its main ingredient was ice cloud grass. This Ling Dan was called Ice Cloud Dan. It could dramatically increase a cultivator's power over water. The Jade Scroll hadn't recorded just how great the increase was. However, for Zhuemo, it still would be very beneficial. He wasn't a sword xiao, and didn't need to consider the problem of the chaos of the 5 elements. Any element in the 5 elements was extremely useful for him. If his water power grew, the power of his Li water sword scripture would be even greater, and easier for him to manipulate. But temporarily, he didn't have the time to make the Ice Cloud Dan. He was in deep debt. Golden Crow Pill. Whenever he thought about the enormous amount of Golden Crow pills, Zhuemo had the impulse to faint. But today it wouldn't be today. He buried his head and slept. The next morning, Zuemo woke up and started his crazy Dan-making days. Su Qing seemed to know of the matter and had prepared large amounts of the ingredients for the fasting pill beforehand. Looking at the mountain of raw materials in front of him, Zuemo wanted to cry. He forced himself to start. A crowd of people appeared in a mountain valley not far from Dongfu. Their clothing was different, and so was their expression. "It's nearby," one of the people said. His face was serious. "But it's hard to find the exact location." "I think that it's here." Another yellow-clad cultivator snorted coldly and followed. "We've gone through the other 12 towns. Other than here, where else?" The other people looked at the silver-clad man that seemed to be the leader. The expression on this male's face was extremely faint. The long robes on his body seemed to have been woven from silver thread, the light gleaming. In the crowd he was extremely eye-catching. The silver-clad man mused for a beat before opening. "Settle down first and then search." The crowd flew in the direction of Dongfu. For hours later, at the same location that the crowd of people had gathered, light flashed, and a crowd of black-clad people appeared. They were all wearing copper masks, the patterns on the masks extremely fierce and only revealing the eyes. "Just in this area. Still not clear about the exact location," a black-clad person said. Then he made a sound of surprise. "There were people just here, not an insignificant number." The leader of the crowd didn't say anything. He lightly waved his hand, and the crowd of black-clad people disappeared into the air. A while later, a white-clad male appeared. If Zuemo could see it, he would be shocked to find that it was the person he had thought was a rich young master, Lin Qian. He only took a glance before disappearing. Zuemo's display in the sect assessment really shocked everyone. The next few days there were continuous visitors. With no other solution, Zuemo could only hang up a sign of seclusion at the mouth of the valley. These few days, he had made Dan to the point he almost threw up. 4 eldest Shiji, for Sui Shixiang, to give to Li Yingfeng Shiji to sell. Only later did he remember that he didn't have any fire seeds himself. 4th grade fire source. If he didn't have one himself, why would he keep on making it? According to the appraisal, there was a probability that it could form golden crow fire. He speculated it was related to the number. Stealing his heart, Zuemo decided to make 500 for himself. In any case, it wasn't as though eating too much would kill him. If he could really form golden crow fire, then he really would have struck gold. 4th grade fire source. The grade of the Lingdan that he made would increase a grade. Thinking of the possibility, he decided to just stay inside the Dan room. Su Qing was one of the busiest people around. She could almost be considered Zuemo's spokesperson. Each day, she needed to give Zuemo the Dan ingredients that had been prepared, and then had to help him distribute the golden crow pill. There wasn't much variance in the amount of golden crow pill that would be made each day, but who would get them? That was a major question. Zuemo, finding it a giant headache, threw the question to Su Qing. Previously he owed her a favor. Zuemo was very willing to help her. The result of this action was that Su Qing's status in the sect instantly rose. She had been the first seat of the Fragrant Ginger Yard's outer sect disciples for a significant amount of time, and was extremely good at managing different personal relations, and knew how to observe expressions. This kind of person who would easily offend her. And now that she had the power to divide the golden crow pill, everyone wouldn't dare to offend her at this time. The temptation of a 4th grade fire seed was too much. The only exception was Hao Min. Because of Zuemo, she found Su Qing even more of an eyesore. But when she thought about the strength he had shown in the sect assessment, she didn't dare to do anything. Zuemo had dared to slap her the previous time. If she provoked him, Zuemo definitely dared to slap her again. How could Su Qing not know that Zuemo was helping her? She was grateful inside, and tried her best to finish everything beautifully. She had been shocked at Zuemo Shixiang's performance in the sect assessment, but what she really respected was Shixiang's craziness as he made Dan. She was very clear how much ingredients she would send in. Maybe for outer sect disciples, talent was something that couldn't be found everywhere. But painstaking effort was something everyone could do, and was more worthy of respect. Not just her. The entire fragrant ginger yard had been frightened by Zuomo's frenzy. Even Shifeng Rong had on multiple occasions called Su Qing in to ask about the situation. And Su Qing, within the limits of her power, gave Xixiang all the help she could give. Like when people asking for golden crow pills would give something like ling grains or vegetables, Su Qing would especially get a shimmy skilled in making food to make ling food, and send it to Zuomo. And then she quickly found that Zuomo would make a few more extra golden crow pills. She knew that helping her out. For the first time in almost 20 days, Zuomo walked out of the Dan room. Pushing open the door, he narrowed his eyes instinctively against the sun. Su Qing, rushing about in the yard preparing ingredients, saw the situation and ran over. Xixiang. It's nothing. I'm coming out to take a breather. Zuomo motioned for her to do what she needed. After furiously making Dan for almost 20 days, he finally completed the majority of his debts and could take a breath. The sun splashing on his body was warm. Zuomo felt extremely comfortable. He ran over to ask Su Qing, "Do you have a sound tablet?" Su Qing was slightly puzzled, but still ran to a room and took out a sound tablet to give to Zuomo. Taking the tablet, he disregarded the surprised expressions of the shimmy and jumped onto the roof. Adding ling energy into the sound tablet, he set it by his side and then laid down, sunning himself and humming a tune. It had been so long since he was this free. Zuomo was extremely relaxed. Just as he relaxed, it suddenly darkened. Stopping his humming, Zuomo opened his eyes. In the sky overhead, a gigantic ship slowly flew past. The size of the large boat was about the same as the 1,000-wing ship that Zuomo had seen before. But the bow was even more sharp. The main body of the ship surrounded by a crowd of beautifully colored birds. Zuomo sat up, face tilted upward to look at the large ship. He searched for what possible large personage that had come to Dongfu. This large ship had alarmed many people. The female disciples in the yard stopped what they were doing and held a discussion. Coincidentally coming out, Shifeng Rong noticed the large ship, and a strange flicker flashed across her eyes. Her mouth scolded, "Stop being noisy." Hearing Shifeng Rong's reproach, everyone instantly became silent and started their work again. Shifeng Rong then scolded Zuomo, who was on the roof, "Go make Dan." Finishing, she left in the direction of Wukong Hall. Zuomo didn't care about being scolded. Inside, he was speculating, did the big ship have a relation with the sect? He felt that Master's expression today wasn't normal. There definitely was something. Of course, he could only speculate. Don't think that Master was just a woman. With her cultivation of Jindan, in Dongfu, that was definitely in the first-class people. Even if something had happened, he couldn't do anything to help. It was good if he didn't make trouble. Thinking about it, Zuomo strolled back to his own little yard. He first went to inspect the ice cloud grass. Seeing vigorous growth, he meditated for 4 hours in the rock room. Due to the ling vein in the rock room and the ling food Su Qing had provided, the increase in Zuomo's cultivation recently was extremely clear. It would just be a while before he would reach the second level of Zhuji. Because he had been busy with making Dan, he hadn't read the jade scroll that Xanyin Sherbua had given him. The ling grasses and herbs in the ling fields had also been neglected recently. The Jinji outside the valley needed to be set up again. He still needed to keep making golden crow pills. He yearned very much for the 4th level golden crow fire. Busy. He liked this kind of busyness. His life was very full. He suddenly thought that it had been a long time since he went into his consciousness to see Pu Yao. He didn't know what the other had been doing. Entering the sea of consciousness, it still looked normal. Zuomo couldn't help but release a breath. What he was most afraid of was that there would be changes every time he came here. And no matter what changed, he wouldn't understand. But when he saw Pu Yao's state, he was alarmed. Chapter 69. Zuomo drooling at an inconspicuous residence within Dongfu. Stars in daytime is caused by the most powerful Yaoma. It is used to ease their absorption of star power during the day by forcing the world to twist and give them access to energy from the stars. The one who spoke was the silver-clad man. He continued in a grave tone. Only when they have no choice would a Yaoma do such a thing. It seems the situation of this Yaoma isn't good. It is very possible they are seriously wounded and need star power to recover, so they were forced to twist the world. As he spoke, his voice relaxed and the others relaxed their expressions. A Yaoma able to create stars in daytime. They definitely are one of the strongest Yaoma. They've only ever appeared in the war 3,000 years ago. I hadn't thought that there would be such a powerful Yaoma hidden away here. He sighed. So what if he's powerful? Isn't he still going to end up in our hands? The yellow-robed Taoist said in a screeching voice. He. The heart of a sky Yao or Black Missouri. If it is added into the sword, my flying sword would increase quite a few levels. Haha, the eyes of this Yaoma is very rare. It naturally can see through anything. The crowd instantly became excited, as though they had already caught that amazing Yaoma. For Xiuzha, a high-level Yaoma's body was a treasure. Almost all the body parts could be used for forging or dan-making, and were all rare items. This group had gathered together for this Yaoma. A powerful Yao who was seriously wounded was a prey that they all coveted. Seeing everyone's mood, the silver-clad man cautioned. Everyone, we shouldn't rejoice preemptively. Haven't you realized that there are many other people after it as well? So what if there are others? Who dares to compete with us? The yellow-robed cultivator said irritably in a high voice, murderous intent thick in his eyes. Viciousness flashed in the eyes of the other people. The silver-clad man said, everyone should have seen that ship today. A 6th-grade treasure ship. It is a rare talisman. If anyone had taken a close look at the tail of the wing boat, you should have seen their emblem. Whose emblem? The yellow-robed Taoist said suspiciously. When he saw that winged boat today, even he had been slightly shocked. The master of bright wave Jia. The silver-clad male said slowly. Everyone instantly became silent as terror made its way across many of their faces. The expression of the yellow-robed Taoist also changed slightly, but he quickly recovered and shrieked. Don't speak nonsense. The master of bright wave Jia had been in seclusion for over 60 years. How could he come to a little place like Sky Moon Jia? I only saw the emblem. In the past, I had spent some time in bright wave Jia, and remember the emblem. The silver-clad male said calmly. Seeing the terror on everyone's faces, he said with a smile. Everyone, don't worry too much. The master of bright wave Jia has not involved himself in common affairs for many years. It's unlikely that he came. Most likely it is his disciple or subordinate. The faces of everyone else relaxed. One of them said, as long as it isn't the master of bright wave Jia, I'm not afraid. Yes. The other people agreed. Why would bright wave Jia interfere in this matter? The yellow-robed cultivator's brow furrowed. Elder, don't forget, Sky Moon Jia is under the jurisdiction of bright wave Jia. This little brother knows that stars in daytime occurred. Then it isn't strange that they would also know. The silver-clad male said. Suddenly the faces of the yellow-robed Taoist and the silver-clad male changed slightly, and they yelled simultaneously. Who? The two rushed outside like a sword. There was nothing outside in the yard. The yellow-robed Taoist flew into the sky and scanned the surroundings before returning. He shook his head at the silver-clad male. Both of them had serious and solemn expressions. Nothing remained of their previous ease. The other people all ran out to ask about the situation. By now, the two had resumed their normal expressions. The silver-clad male said, Nothing, just a false alarm. Hearing this, the people released a breath and conversed as they walked back into the room. The yellow-robed Taoist followed last. Before re-entering, he glanced back before following. A moment later, in a shadowed corner, a figure silently appeared. It was the white-clothed Lin Qian. He revealed a pondering expression before disappearing. In the Dongfu Hall, everyone had gathered together. Tian Songzi, as the local leader, sat at the head with Yu by standing by his side. Below him, 6 people sat and leisurely drank tea. This time, we are really troubling you. The one that spoke was a beautiful matron. Clear eyes, white teeth, and extremely graceful. On her shoulder, there was a little light yellow bird that curiously examined the others. Yin Xiaxianzi too is too courteous. Tian Songzi said with a laugh. To have so many fellow experts come to my humble place, This one is very honored. It is a little place. If there is something that we cannot fulfill well, everyone please forgive us. It will be fine. Everyone raised their hands in a greeting. Tian Songzi's expression was worried as he continued. I'm not going to conceal it from everyone. Since the appearance of stars in daytime, my heart hasn't felt steady. I may be inexperienced, but I do know that this isn't any kind of a good omen. I feel much more secure now that everyone has come today. You don't need to worry. Yun Xiaoxinzi comforted. Master Yuan is skilled at detecting presences, and is very sensitive to Yaoma. He will definitely find where the Yaoma is hiding. At this point, Master Yuan hurriedly said, Yun Xiaoxinzi is too complimentary. While respectfully standing to side, Yu Bai was very shocked inside. The people sitting here all had significant cultivation. The one that attracted his attention the most was the little girl, who had been sitting with a bowed head at the end. Her age appeared almost the same as his, but her cultivation was indecipherable to him. He who had always been proud of his accomplishments felt uncomfortable inside. There were too many geniuses in this world. Pu Yao looked extremely poor. He sat on the gravestone. His face was pale, and appeared to be exhausted like a flickering lamp. Zuemo instantly was scared. The invincible Pu Yao. Why was he suddenly in this state? Zuemo carefully went closer. Pu, what's going on? Pu Yao opened his eye to look at Zuemo. His voice was very calm, and just as confident as usually, and asked in exchange, What? Zuemo noticed that Pu Yao's alluring crimson blood eye was much fainter than usual, and even his voice seemed weaker. But for some reason, when he heard Pu Yao's confident voice, Zuemo felt safe. Is it that you don't have enough Jingshi? Zuemo couldn't help but ask in concern. He didn't know why he was so concerned about Pu Yao. Logically, the other was a Yaoma. The earlier he died the better. But seeing Pu Yao's state, Zuemo couldn't help but ask in concern. Looking at Zuemo again, Pu Yao seemed to be surprised by Zuemo's question. Want to help me? Pu Yao's eyebrow rose. Zuemo muddled a response non-committally. He had learned. Pu Yao suddenly smiled. I'll take you to a place. Pu Yao proceeded to take out a few pieces of Jingshi. On the ground, he began to make a seal formation that Zuemo had never seen before. Zuemo might have never seen the seal formation, but this Jingshi he was familiar with, wasn't it? He touched his body and his expression changed. This damned Renyao, he took my Jingshi again. Before he could speak, light suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. He couldn't help but close his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he was dumbstruck. Pu, where is this? He stammered his question. It was dark and shadowy in front of him. He could feel cold granite under his feet. What was flowing in a nearby stream was fresh red blood. Was this hell? Zuemo forced himself to swallow, his mind tense as he looked at the surroundings. Pu Yao groaned in pleasure. He spread out his arms, his face intoxicated, completely void of his previous exhaustion. Sword cave. Pu Yao returned to his lazy state. He stuck out his bright red tongue, his eyes bright as he licked his lips. There are many souls here. Such delicious souls. Sword cave. Zuemo blinked. He had lived in Wukong Sword Sect for 2 years, and he had heard of the Sword Cave before. Wasn't Wei Sheng Xixiang in the Sword Cave? He wasn't afraid anymore, and curiously looked at the surroundings. He asked Pu Yao worriedly, Wei Sheng Xixiang is also in the Sword Cave. Would he encounter us? If he encountered Xixiang, he couldn't even protest his innocence. This Sword Cave has 18 levels. Pu Yao was full of disdain as he looked at Zuemo. Your Wei Xixiang has already descended to the 16th level. If you had half the ability of your Xixiang, would I be in this sorry state? As he spoke, he became angry. A Sky Yao falling to such a level. So embarrassing. Seeing Pu Yao acting like normal, for some reason, Zuemo relaxed significantly. He instantly went at it with Pu Yao, sneering. None of my business. What Sky Yao? Weren't you wounded by my Sherbois? Aren't you only able to bully the greenhorn Juji cultivators like me? He quickly corrected. Wrong, Ji was only Lianqi at the time. And you dared to speak of it. Pu Yao wasn't angry and laughed. This place is good. There's a lot of yin energy, and it's so comfortable. There are even souls. although they are incomplete souls, but it's better than nothing. How did you find this place? Zuemo was very curious. This sword cave was kept secret. He had stayed here for 2 years, but didn't know where it was. Yet Pu Yao was able to find it. He had heard that it required 2 Jindan cooperating to open the sword cave. Pu Yao was able to easily enter. This guy still has some ability, Zuemo thought. Pu Yao said disdainfully. In just this tiny Wukong sword sect I knew after taking a single look. He then said to Zuemo. In the future, we will come visit this place occasionally. Come here. Zuemo's eyes widened. He shook his head without any hesitation. No way. Do you know how much Jingshi you spent today? For pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi. For pieces. Do you know how many golden crow pills I need to make to earn 4 pieces of 3rd grade Jingshi? You spent it so easily. Pu Yao was full of disdain. That only shows you are trash. Earning Jingshi like you're giving birth. Meeting such a trash like you. Zuemo didn't hesitate to interrupt, also full of disdain as he said. If you can do it, you go earn it. Aren't you a Sky Yao? What? A Sky Yao, but you have to extract Jingshi from me. Like that's something to be proud of. As he spoke, it was like the accumulated anger had suddenly erupted. Go had worked so hard to earn the Jingshi with sweat and blood. Good for you, you just swiped it all away without a sound. You're freeloading. Go hasn't even asked you for rent. And you charged me for each lesson. You even started to take Jingshi for each experience of sword essence. Aren't you embarrassed? Zuemo righteously listed Pu Yao's offenses. Pu Yao was dumbstruck. The reality proved it. Even the most powerful Yaoma, facing the even stronger tongue, they would also become dumbfounded. After Zuemo ranted for 5 minutes, he then stopped in satisfaction. That felt good. After a long while, Pu Yao finally recovered. He tilted his head in thought and said, All right then, I'll teach you a little technique that can earn Jingshi. Zuemo's mind instantly became alert, and he went over. What technique? Yin is cloud, Xia is red cloud? Immortal goddess. Misogyny and Xianxia. The titles of females are usually Xinzi, while males get Daren, Jimren, etc. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.